Good morning, everybody. If you all want to start heading to your seats, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. As usual, there's plenty of seats in the front too, if anybody wants to move forward. All right. Well, good morning and welcome. On behalf of the Alumni Association and staff and our officers, we're so delighted to see everybody today. Whether you're joining us here in person or online, we are certainly glad to have you with us. One of the things we've tried to do with our LAC meetings is brand those. And so you may notice some dream signs around the building and throughout your materials. We are excited to dream with you over the next 2 days. So why dream? When our staff was brainstorming this theme, we thought it fit our current position as an alumni association. As we move forward with this strategic planning, we've been challenged to dream about what our new UK Alumni Association can be. We also know that Monday is a special day as we celebrate the life and accomplishments of one of the best dreamers of all time, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We also hope that you enjoy our time together and have a little fun along the way. We're also going to see how good your song knowledge is throughout the weekend, so be prepared to participate. There are prizes involved. Leslie Hayes is our director of fun, and she is fun, so we have a lot of fun planned for you on that front. There are a few individuals I wanted to mention this morning before we get started. Joining us later today, I don't think he's here yet, will be Tom Harris. Tom is our acting vice president for philanthropy and alumni engagement. So many of you know Tom. He has supervised us a couple of times along the way. I believe twice is the number. He also has overseen important areas at UK like government relations, public relations, marketing, and event management. Also the UK radio station, and he's traveled many miles with Presidents Todd and Capilouto, both inside and outside the Commonwealth. And we're excited to have him back again on our team for at least a little while. So you'll see him throughout the weekend. Two of our colleagues from philanthropy are here this morning too. So I wanted to introduce them. Susanna Denemy, our Associate Vice President for Philanthropy. Many of you know Susanna. She's been here not quite as long as Mike, but a long time. So has worked alongside Mike for many years and is a key part of our philanthropy team. And also in the back is Brent Piper, another Associate Vice President for Philanthropy. He primarily works with our campaign, and we're glad to have him with us too throughout the weekend. We do have a few new staff members who have joined our team since the September meeting. So I do want to introduce them quickly. First, we have Sally Shearer. She is the managing editor of Kentucky Alumni Magazine. So she is there in the back, and we're glad to have Sally on our team. And out in the hallway, there are two other new staff members, Deja Brooks, who many of you met this summer at Summer Workshop. She was one of our case interns, but she is serving as the clubs and programs assistant. And then Morgan Cornelius started with us this week. Some of you may know her too. She's a former UK ambassador, and her dad has been the Cumberland Valley East Club president in the back. So we knew Morgan when she was really young, and now she's graduated from UK, but she's going to be with us 20 hours a week this semester helping the administration area. So we appreciate them joining our team and are glad to have them with us. Let's see. We also have some new board members and LAC members who are with us for the first time. So if I could, I'd like for you to stand if this is your very first meeting ever with the Alumni Association. So, Alan. Okay, in the back there, we have Alan Wilson. So Alan's a new board member. And then Glenn Pearson just stood up too. Glenn's from McCracken County. Anybody else brand new? First time meeting? Okay. Well, say hello to them if you haven't met them yet. We're glad to have them in our fold, and we welcome them to our board in LAC. As we kick off the weekend, I'd like to thank the officers and the executive committee for all their hard work in planning this special weekend. Their suggestions and support have been terrific. I'd also like to thank our UK Alumni Association staff. I have stolen a quote from Coach Cal a few times that I'm sure you've heard him say, and that is, "I like my team." and I like my team. And I mean that wholeheartedly when I say that. During my tenure in this position at the Alumni Association, we've never had a meeting under normal circumstances. I got this job in February of 2020, and I think we went home in March of 2020. So hybrid meetings and the ins and outs are somewhat tough to navigate. But this group keeps finding ways to effectively engage our alumni and to be creative. And to play into the theme of the weekend, teamwork really does make the dream work. So I thank all of them for their hard work, and I'm going to give them all a hand this morning. So also to each of you as volunteers, to give your time and resources to further the mission of your alma mater is to be commended. I know many of you got up early to hop on a plane or made special arrangements at home and work to be able to be with us. And that's both virtually and in person. But we really thank you for your efforts and for your time that you're going to spend with us this weekend. A few housekeeping items. The restrooms are to my right in the hallway nearest Mr. Gatton's portrait. So right where you checked in over here. Feel free to go in and out as you need to. Our Zoom moderator today is Meredith Weber. So she is handling our online participants this morning. We've got a fair number of online participants, and we're excited they're with us too. You will also notice a piece of hardware over here. We just ask that you be responsible. I have to get it back to athletics in one piece. We have a couple garters that are in street clothes, but they'll come get you if it's shaking or if we need to address anything. But just feel free to take photos. Just try not to shake the table too bad. Also, thank you for wearing your masks inside today. Please note that Rupp Arena also has a mask policy in effect along with other buildings. If you do need a mask, please tell your staff. If you are coming to the podium at any point, you can remove it at the podium. Before we get started with our first speaker, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time to get to know your table mates. So if you'll introduce yourselves to those around you, share your name, maybe your career or current town, and feel free to share what you're dreaming to get out of this weekend. So when our speaker gets here, we'll get started with our first session. So we have a little bit of a break before we get started.
All righty. Well, good morning. This morning, you get to hear from a couple of pinch hitters as while President Mary Shellman is representing us at a very important meeting here on campus. I'm delighted to be with you to introduce this morning opening session. As we dream together for the next 2 days, I hope this session will leave you inspired and thinking about how we can remain committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion as an organization, as it's fitting thought just before Martin Luther King holiday. Dr. King's famous quote, "I have a dream," encourage us all to dream bigger and aim higher. And don't forget, as one people. We are delighted to have with us Dr. George Wright with us this morning. He's no stranger to the University of Kentucky and the Alumni Association. If you all remember, he was with us last January, where he addressed our group. Since then, he has taken on a new role as senior advisor to the president, while also teaching history in the Arts and Science College. After a storied career in higher education, Dr. Wright found his way back to his alma mater during 2019 as a visiting professor, same year the UK commemorated 70 years of integration. He then went on to serve as interim vice president for the institutional diversity until the arrival of Dr. Catrice Albert earlier this academic year. A noted African-American scholar, Dr. Wright was the 17th president of Prairie View A&M University, the second oldest institution of higher education in Texas. Prior to joining Prairie View A&M family, Wright was executive vice president for the academic affairs and provost at the University of Texas at Arlington. In 1993, he joined the faculty at Duke University as vice provost for the university programs and director of Afro-American Studies program. At Duke, he also held the William R. Kennan Jr. Chair in American History. In 1980 to 1993, he also served as assistant professor, associate professor, and was for the and was the holder of the Mainstream Gentry White Professorship of Southern History and Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. A lot of roles there, Dr. George Wright. His wealth of experience in higher education began as an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky in 1977. He has been a recipient of numerous fellowships, grants, and awards, and he also serves on many boards. In 2004, he was awarded honorary doctorate of letters from the University of Kentucky, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame of Distinguished Alumni in 2005. While we're delighted to have you, Dr. Wright, with us today, we thank you so much. Without further ado, Dr. George Wright, ladies and gentlemen. In your wildest dream.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me okay. And if I'm ever not clear, please let me know. As was mentioned, I spoke via Zoom to you, to the UK Alumni Association almost a year ago to this day. I believe it was on a Friday morning. In that regard, we were all, of course, UK was not meeting in person at that time. And so it took place in that environment. And so I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak with you again today. What I would like to do today is to, in some ways, follow up on the comments that I made last time. This time last year, the University of Kentucky was 6 months into its diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And I've been asked as the interim vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion to more or less start the whole effort. That the University of Kentucky would formulate 6 work streams and 17 different projects discussing a wide range of issues. And so this time last year, we had populated all 17 of the different projects. There had been some 700 people who had either volunteered, been nominated, or their job may have said he or she should be involved. So we had narrowed that down to about 200 people, and the other 500 people would be used in surveys and a range of other things. And indeed, now that we're in year 2, some people have phased out, a few people have actually left the university. So there are other people who are now engaged. But last year, by this time, we were in the process of making sure that we had goals for all of the different projects, that we had come up with a schedule to meet and things like that. And we thought it was very important that some progress be made. And so some of the very early of the 17 projects were student focused. For instance, that we wanted to make sure that new students, regardless of whether they were freshmen, sophomore, or even graduate students, but definitely freshman students, that those individuals, when they came to orientation programs at the University of Kentucky, they also learned about how diverse Kentucky is. And when we talked about diversity, it's not just racial diversity, but socioeconomic diversity. Every continent in the world is represented on this campus and the like. But we definitely wanted to talk about diversity at the University of Kentucky. So there were some early efforts related to students. It had been, like a lot of universities, there was dialogue. Do we need new multicultural centers that not only are there African-American, but under the title of Asian? And that doesn't do justice to the wide range of people from that huge continent of Asia, not to mention people from India, not to mention people from Europe, not to mention people from Africa. So should the University of Kentucky have, in addition to the MLK Center, another or some other type of multicultural center? So that's one of the things that was worked on and was decided, and that's progress that's being made. One of the areas where a lot of progress was made last year was that this university was very committed to making sure that women and minority business people, primarily small businesses, had opportunities to bid on jobs, to win contracts, to do business with the University of Kentucky. And so one of the work streams was devoted to that. And progress was made. And indeed, they started working with minority contractors, showing how they could be qualified, the rules that the state of Kentucky had them live under, and things like that. The University of Kentucky, one of the projects that we very much wanted to get started was a new cultural master plan, just looking at this university and saying, if you walk from here or anywhere, does this, are the things that you see, whether in the student center or anywhere, reflect the richness of Kentucky? So one of the work streams that made progress then and has continued on is a new campus master plan, being very aware of that there are people with disabilities and a range of issues here. And another activity that was very important is that the University of Kentucky is located in Lexington, in central Kentucky, and that many, well, virtually all of us live somewhere in central Kentucky, if not in Lexington, but our children go to school here, excuse me, our spouses, significant others work here. So what should we be doing with the city of Lexington? And so consequently, Lexington, which had come up with its own diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and they had some 53 recommendations that they had. Some of their recommendations were relevant to the University of Kentucky. So if you think about the spectrum of the University of Kentucky, there are some people here who've been working with the city of Lexington. So one of our DEI efforts was work with Lexington. What I would like to spend a few moments talking about today are the research activities under the DEI plan. That research, of course, is one of the engines of the University of Kentucky. That the University of Kentucky, as you know, that we're all proud of, that the University of Kentucky is the flagship. It is the leading. That's not to put down any other university, because all universities have missions. I've been affiliated with the University of Kentucky, Research One. I've been affiliated with University of Texas in Austin, Research One. I've been affiliated with Duke University, Research One. I was president of a historically Black college for 14 years, has a different mission than the mission of the University of Texas, the University of Kentucky. All schools' missions are important, but UK's mission is to be involved in world-class research across the board. So UK, flagship university, major research university. It's also, for the state of Kentucky, it's land grant university. University of Texas is not the land grant university in Texas. Texas A&M University is the land grant university. Well, in some instances, in some states, University of Michigan, one of the best universities in the country, not the land grant university for Michigan. And so, but the University of Kentucky is all of these things rolled into it. About the same time that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative was starting, President Capilouto announced that one of the major research focuses of the university would come under something called Unite. United in true racial equality, that President Capilouto announced that $10 million would be allocated over a 5-year period for research to be done in social health, in mental health, in medical issues, in criminal justice issues. And this would go throughout the university. Led by our outstanding Vice President of Research, Lisa Casas, that she and other scholars started working, and their first goal was to make sure that all research professors at the university were aware of Unite, and that many of them should link hands and join in some of the programs of Unite. And so by this time, we were having programs to bring people under the umbrella of Unite. So Unite today probably has over 100 UK faculty affiliated from the medical school, from that whole complex, through arts and sciences, through education, through law, through social work, and the like. These scholars are writing research proposals on healthcare, on social disparities, and things of that nature. Unite is also involved in going out into the communities of Kentucky, saying in minority communities in Bowling Green, in Hazard, in Louisville, elsewhere, here are research efforts on disease, on hypertension, on high blood pressure, on sickle cell anemia, on various things that we are concerned about that may greatly impact largely the African-American community. So they've informed those communities of that. At the same time, Unite, aware of the small numbers in some areas of minority and women faculty, have made sure that fellowships are available for those who've received their PhDs to come here and work with some leading professors so that those individuals can then enhance their careers and maybe become professors here. One of the most important initiatives that started before last year, but has now been rolled into the DEI effort, is something called the Diversity Incentive Fund. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. But the University of Kentucky sets aside a minimum of $2.75 million every year to help all of the colleges and schools of the university to identify, to then recruit, and then hire, then enhance the careers of minority faculty. Here's how it works. I'm in the history department, and history has definitely taken advantage of that. They identify a young professor who they say is truly outstanding, and the university then says, okay, you can use some of these funds for the first 2 years. The university will give $75,000 up to $75,000 for a maximum of $150,000 as a portion of his or her salary. In some disciplines like history, that will do it. In some disciplines like medicine, that will not cover the whole salary. They'll even pay part of the startup costs in that regard. But one of the things that the University of Kentucky had to reckon with, and maybe in your particular discipline, let's say if you're in a discipline outside of academe, but this I think is relevant to you, you hire some young person, you help that person really grow, and then guess what? Once they become accomplished, other universities in our context, or other, whatever your discipline is, other people, companies, businesses, then take those people, hire those people away from you. I grew up loving baseball, and my favorite baseball team then and now was the New York Yankees. Well, the New York Yankees, Boston Red Sox, Los Angeles Dodgers, they have far more money than some of the smaller Milwaukee Brewers, for an example, Kansas City Royals. And so over the years, people would start off at those smaller cities, and then the Yankees would buy them, or Boston would buy them. Same things with universities. And so part of this money was used to make counter offers. As it turned out, last school year, when I was the interim vice president, 7 African-American women across this campus were offered jobs at peer universities. University of Virginia, University of North Carolina, Ivy League type of schools, schools we aspire to be. And we worked very hard. We, Office of the Provost, Vice President of Research, the individual college and department, we made offers to keep every one of those 7. Remarkable. Something very important. I started out here at the University of Kentucky in 1977 as a professor. In 1980, a school called the University of Texas at Austin made me an offer to go there. Back then, the University of Kentucky just kind of said, well, we're not big and braggadocious like Texas. And so I went to Texas. Now, we would not allow a young person like me willingly to go to the University of Texas. So that's something else that Unite has done. Very important has been something else in the research area that has grown out of Unite. It's called the Commonwealth Institute for Black Studies, or CIBS, Commonwealth Institute for Black Studies. This is an interdisciplinary group of scholars who are interested in Blacks in America, or something called the African diaspora, the spreading of Black people throughout the world. Okay, I'm a history professor, so please bear with me for a second, don't boo, but I want to just give you a little background. As you know from your classes, if you can look back from the early 1500s to the mid 1800s, the Atlantic slave trade ended in the United States in 1808, but continues in Brazil much longer. But for almost 250 years, the Atlantic slave trade was the largest forced migration in the history of humankind. Whatever number I were to tell you of people involved, it would be an underestimation. But scholars estimate between 20 million and 80 million people were in villages in Africa who were then uprooted, 1/4 of those people dying out of it. But these people then spread to the Americas and elsewhere. One of the things students don't know, that scholars of the African diaspora, only 10% of those people who left Africa came to what is now the United States, less than 10%. Meanwhile, 40% of those people go to one place, and that would be one of the first 2 European nations involved in the slave trade, the Portuguese country in the New World of Brazil. 40% of everybody who left Africa went to Brazil. But along with these people would be crops. Along with these people would be the spread of disease. One of the things that scholars are very interested in is that when these people arrived, let's say in South Carolina, white people, white indentured servants working alongside African slaves were dying, that whites would die almost immediately upon working there in South Carolina. Why were Blacks not dying? Well, Blacks had come from parts of Africa that had malaria and yellow fever, and they had built up a certain level of immunity to that, something called the sickle cell trait. Ironically, it, quote unquote, benefited them in colonial South Carolina, but it's still killing Black people today. And so one of the things that people are looking at are disease things. I've been fortunate enough, maybe like some of you, to go to many different places in the world, and almost every country I've gone to, I've been surprised to see Black folk. I had this generalization: if you go to Portugal, Portugal's all white. Wrong. You go to Amsterdam, first time to Amsterdam, I see all of these Black folk. And so I went up to one of them and said, "Hey, brother, where are you from?" Now, first of all, he didn't look at me like, Why is he calling me brother? I don't even speak English. What is in that regard? But I wanted to know, I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Amsterdam. I said, no, where are you from? Then he said, I'm from Suriname in South America, a place. And I said, but no, where are you from? He then tells me from the Sudan. You see, if you go to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and you ask the same thing as I've asked people, they will tell you, well, I'm from Brazil or I'm from Rio de Janeiro. Then you say, no, where else? Then they'll say, we're from Cape Town, South Africa. Then you say, no, that's where folks ship from. Where were you from? Then you'll say Zimbabwe in that regard. And if you look at the parallel, you'll see that folk from South Africa went to Brazil. Folk from other places came to South Carolina and the like. The point is that we have scholars looking at the African diaspora. We have graduate students who are working on these things, but these scholars are doing even more. They're looking at connections to Kentucky and African Americans and the bourbon industry. They're looking at connections to Black people and the horse racing industry. A lot of people forget, I've been told by one of our scholars who's working on Blacks in the horse racing industry, he said, take LeBron James, well-known name, or take somebody else like that from the NFL. She said there were Black jockeys in the 1890s who were just as big a deal as LeBron James is now. That almost doesn't seem real to me, right? But that's what these scholars have shown us to be. Growing out of the Commonwealth Institute of Black Studies, and I should say this, you may have seen last week in UK now, the university announced that it was going to give the Commonwealth Institute, the first year it gave it $250,000 seed money, but the university was so pleased with the number of people who came under umbrella that they're going to give the Commonwealth Institute of Black Studies $200,000 into perpetuity. Now, I don't know what that means to you, but it says to me, as long as there is a University of Kentucky and it's above water, there's also going to be a Commonwealth Institute for Black Studies. I think that's a pretty big deal and commitment on the part of the University of Kentucky. I'll mention another research project. In 2019, when I came here as a visitor, was also the 400th anniversary of when slavery was introduced into British North America. The Spanish and the Portuguese had slaves before them, but it was the 400th anniversary. In honor of that, a lot of programs were held. We held a program here. Long and short of it was that we decided to do a project on slavery in Kentucky. Slavery in Kentucky is a very fascinating topic. Almost any comment you make about slavery in Kentucky, I will say, well, that's true, but you do know it was more than just that. Most people will want to assume that slavery in Kentucky was like slavery in the cotton lands. They think about slavery and slave owners having 20 or more slaves. The average slave owner in Kentucky has 5 or fewer slaves. The average slave owner works side by side with his slaves in that regard. If you only have 5, most of you out there on the farm together. Slavery in Kentucky existed from 1780s to 1865. In fact, most people don't realize you know what, every once in a while when I was younger and my ego could take it, I would at this point say, how many of you all have read my book on Blacks in Louisville where I talk about the end of slavery in Kentucky? And folk would look at me like, what? You wrote a book on Black? And I would feel my feelings would be so hurt. But nevertheless, I don't do that anymore. But as I point out, slavery ended last in Kentucky of all the places in the Union. People that, but they don't really quite understand the significance of that. The Emancipation Proclamation, a wartime measure by President Lincoln, freed the slaves in the rebelling states. But Lincoln does not control the rebelling states. But as the Union Army moved southward, They freed the slaves because of that document that went into effect January the 1st, 1863. Lincoln's emancipation did not free the slaves in the 4 loyal states: Delaware, Missouri, Kentucky, and why am I blanking on the other? Then the 3 loyal states: Delaware, Missouri, Kentucky. Those other states had a very small number of slaves. Kentucky had 100,000 slaves. Some slaves were freed under the second part of Lincoln's emancipation, which said if a man joined the army, he was free. The Civil War ends in April 1865. Technically, slavery only exists in Kentucky of all the states until the passing of the 13th Amendment, which goes into effect 1865. I just point that out again as the kind of work that scholars are doing. As I come to a close, the DEI initiative, the DEI plan is very important. First of all, the goals of DEI, whether it's for students, whether it's for contractors, whether it's working with the city, whether it's in research, are consistent with the goals of the University of Kentucky. For an example, UK now has a new strategic plan. Well, the DEI principles, some of them are in principle number 5. I was one of the co-chairs in principle number 5, which is many diverse people, one community. And you will see some of the goals of DEI are incorporated right there. I will stop by saying that consistently progress has been made here at UK. I found it so interesting that the president started off by saying it's a good time to have this program today because it's on the heels of MLK Day. Well, lo and behold, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but after Martin Luther King's death in 1968, the University of Kentucky becomes one of, I would say, no more than a dozen universities to say, we've got to find a way to integrate more. It was already desegregated by law from 1949, but there were very few African-American students here at that time. And they came up with a program in 1968 that said anyone Black from here in Lexington who had graduated from high school that spring should come out to UK for a summer program. And if they successfully completed that program, they would be given a Martin Luther King scholarship. I graduated from Lafayette in 1968. But when they announced that, I said, this sounds too good. There's got to be a trick to this. Lo and behold, I come out here to that program. The second day they say, bring your high school grades, a transcript with you. I bring my transcript that second night, and it's about 50 young African Americans there. This is a true story, you all. The daily newspapers talked about this. They said, everybody can leave but George Wright. I said, what? For once I'm being quiet. For once I brought no attention to myself because this seems too good. They looked at my grades and said, young man, you're not going to make it here at the University of Kentucky. You've never made an A. And on the occasion when you've made a B, you made a D to offset it to keep your C average in that regard. And at Lafayette, there are 550 students, and you're graduating like 510 out of that. By the way, I've often wondered, what about those folk who graduated behind me at Lafayette? What did they do, in that regard? Well, they said that they didn't think I would make it. My response was, I have been mad at the world. My father abandoned my mother and 6 kids. And I've been angry about that. but I've decided there's nothing I can do about this, and I think an education can help. They then said I could stay. 9 years later, thanks to those folk in the history department, I have a PhD from Duke University, and the world opened up to me to now I'm in my 70s and new opportunities still come my way. That's what the University of Kentucky did and has been doing. I thank you. Oh, and I should also mention, Lord, if I don't say this, one of the reasons I wanted to stay in that MLK program was that I looked across the room and there was this skinny young woman over there. And I went over and asked her out and she said, okay. And we've been married 51 and a half years. So again, so UK even got me a wife. I think that's pretty good. Okay. So I will stop right there and entertain any questions, comments that you might have. You have to ask me something, because see, I work for President Capilouto, and I've got to tell him that you all thought this and that, and you all engage with me and all this stuff. Yes, sir.
Really wonderful story. I too showed up in 1968 and got the letter from UK that said you probably weren't going to make it. And showed up anyway. But a little story, which everybody in here has to hear because it involves the marching band. As you recall, in '68, Nat Northington had broken the integration barrier in '67.
That's right.
And I believe Wilbur Hackett was here in '68. I'm not sure, but he was probably a freshman, or maybe he was '69. But anyway, in the band, it used to be the Marching 100, and then we got a new band director, William Harry Clark, and we thought we had some other band director when we showed up, and then Harry was there. And we had, instead of marching about 75, we had marched 125 with women and flag bearers and majorette corps and all that stuff. And the band in band camp that summer played Dixie. We had one black member of the band who actually was a senior, and I'm sorry, but I cannot remember his last name, but Charlie was his first name. And Charlie played the bell lyre. And, you know, Nat Northington had integrated football. Jim Green was, I mean, all-world sprinter.
That's right.
And all the things that happened in '68, and the discussion began to stop playing Dixie.
Okay.
And Harry Clark went to the president, who was, I cannot remember that right at this second, and said, you know, you ought to issue an order about stopping to play Dixie. And the president told him, goes, well, that's a, you know, teaching decision. You know, that's not one that should be made at the president's office. Yeah. So Harry came back, we removed Dixie from the music folder, and it was never played again.
Let me share this with you. You're saying, I think it's so fascinating that you said you started in 1968, because every time I tell folk about UK having had a program for Black students in 1968, I always say if they were doing this now, it would be for underrepresented groups, which would include a wide range of folk, which would also include white folk as well. And it also makes me want to say, when I mention DEI and I mention the programs that we're doing, please understand these programs and these activities are not just for Black people or about Black people. They're for everyone. I've taught Black history since the 1970s. And you know, I argue with myself all the time, who needs Black history most? Should it be taught just to Black folk, or should it be taught just to white folk? Right? Think about that. Who needs it the most? I decided that both of them need it, because both of them have misconceptions about race and about each other. One other comment, I was scared to, maybe you all were not, since you all did not graduate at the bottom of your class in coming here, I'm scared to death of everything at UK 1968. And so I go to the football game and Black students, I'm a freshman, they say, we don't stand when they play Dixie. I said, darn. Actually, I said another word than darn. And I said, I don't know what to do. Look at all these folks. Every time I went to a UK home game and they played Dixie, I was in the restroom during that time period. I just couldn't take it, you all. But you know what it did for me though? I have decided all of my life that I've got to stand with other folk, and that just because something doesn't bother me personally, UK taught me to have empathy for other folk. And so long before I heard of a gay movement or this movement or that movement, anybody who I saw as being treated as an outsider. So let's say, and it didn't happen here, but let's say if there was somebody sitting over here and nobody else would sit with that person, you can say, guess what? George Wright's gonna run over and sit with that person, because he doesn't want that person to feel like what it feels to be an outsider. So I just think about so many good things that came out of that. But point I was making, UK and the programs that we're about are for all people, even if it may have a focus on women or whatever. By the way, I tell everybody, as much as I've done Black history all my career, as much as we do that, if you came to me and said, I need to take a history course that's going to focus on one group of folk, what should it be? I said, it's easy for me. Take a course on women's history. That you see, the universities that I have been affiliated with, I've not been affiliated with all of them, but I've been affiliated with some really good Southern universities, right on? In that regard, they were wrong on race, but they eventually acknowledged it. They were equally wrong on gender, but were much slower to acknowledge it in that regard. So somebody like me who is Black must champion women. I think all of us must champion women's rights as well. That's me personally. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say, when I started at UK, I think the population, Black population, was less than 1%.
Okay.
Which is, I don't, what is it today? Just
don't hold me to this. Now, please, ma'am, don't you all dare. You're gonna say he's the senior advisor to the president and he doesn't know. I'm gonna say it's around 5%. Okay. In that regard. Now, I would also say, and again, I try to put things fairly. I try not to, but Kentucky's population of African Americans, if you said only 5% in South Carolina, in a state where the Black population is probably 40 to 45%, it ought to reflect that more. If Kentucky's ought to be better, but you could see why if South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia reflect that. By the same token, I bet you North Dakota's population of Black students is probably 1%, you see, or something like that, in a state where the total population of Blacks is probably 0.005%. So I just point that out, just try to make sure we're clear on why things may be as they are.
And I just wanted to say, I'm not sure if you've read this or anybody in the room has, but there was an article in The Athletic. Did y'all read that about Kellen Grady? His grandparent, he's on the basketball team, obviously, and his grandparents were freedom fighters in South Africa and friends of Nelson Mandela. And the interesting thing is, I can't remember where he transferred from. Somebody help me. Davidson, sorry. When he was at Davidson, he was marching in some type of movement. And someone came to him and called him a not so nice name. So he decided then he was going to do something about it. He knew his grandparents' history, but he had really not been that engaged. But that particular moment made him really be dedicated to addressing race and the issues surrounding it. But it's a wonderful article. So if you don't have The Athletic,
I have not seen that.
I can share it with you, but it's amazing. His grandparents' history is absolutely amazing. Yes, his grandmother was the primary person that was involved in South Africa. So you might want to reach out to him or check with him, because he's trying to do, is it a foundation
Okay.
to look at race issues. And he said he really doesn't have time right now, and he sort of lost momentum
Right.
during COVID and when he transferred to UK. But he said as soon as basketball season's over,
Wow.
he
Okay.
really wants to reach out to some high
Okay.
schools and grade schools in the area
Okay.
and kind of share his story and his desire to help.
Okay. Okay. You mentioned South Africa. Again, I've wrote over the years 3 books on race relations in Kentucky. And about 20 years ago, I decided that it's important for me to understand race and hatred and all of those things in a larger context. And so I decided that I want to do a comparative study of race. And so over the last 20 years, I have spent time. First, my wife got her degree in journalism from here, and she's in the College of Communication Hall of Fame. And so she's always traveled with me. We went for 10 years consecutively every summer to Eastern Europe, and we would go through concentration camps, culminating by spending a week in Poland and Auschwitz, in Krakow, in Warsaw. We've been to Kiev, we've been to Moscow, we've been to St. Petersburg. Then after that, we decided that we wanted to go to Australia and understand race there. And so we traveled throughout various places in Australia. We've been all places like Portugal, Belgium, all those places, but we saved for last the 2 places that we thought would inform us most about race, and those would be South Africa and Brazil. And so over a number of occasions that we've traveled to Brazil to try to understand race and put it into a context, and then we traveled to South Africa. What I think is very important about South Africa is that you mentioned it and Nelson Mandela and that whole movement there. And they've done something that I wish we would do in the United States. I wish we would somehow remember openly, honestly, candidly our past, and then reconcile each other with the past. That at some point in America, we need to move beyond some of the fighting about the Confederacy and all of those kinds of things in that sense. But I think South Africa said, when I came here in 2019, I had as a goal to take my seminar students to both Brazil and South Africa. We were able to raise enough money to where on May the 12th, 2020, my students and I were going to go to South Africa for 2 weeks, but COVID knocked us out. And we've not, of course, been able to go back to that. But I'm hoping in my time here at UK, I can take students to South Africa to show them that country, its contradictions and all of that. And I would like to also take them to Brazil and show the same things there to help put race in the United States into another kind of context.
All right, we have some questions online today. So the first one is from Keith Knapp, and he was asking if you could address the positive advent of faculty training on implicit bias.
Okay. Well, okay. I would say what I find positive is having any conversations on, if you say bias, if you say on race. Last year, even during COVID, when I was the interim, I was asked to speak to a wide range of groups here at UK. For an example, Mitch Barnhart had me speak to all the athletes, and then to all of the coaches and all of the personnel in athletics. I would have never dreamed that I'd have an opportunity to actually speak with folk at UK Athletics about race. And I did that with a lot of other folk. And here's what I said. First of all, none of us, myself included, is the expert on race. None of us are. That I think race is such a complicated topic that almost if you took my class that I'm teaching this semester and wrote down every word I said, you would say by the end of the semester, do you know how many times he contradicted himself? He said this about black folk. He said this about white folk. Then he turned around and said this about white folk, black folk. Well, that's how race is. Almost anything positive you say about white people is true. Anything negative you say about white people, true. Anything positive you say about black folk, true. Anything negative you say about black folk, true. But what do you focus on in that sense? So I think it's important, folks, to have a dialogue. And in doing so when I say implicit racial training, it's for us to really listen to what other people say. That in race and maybe some other issues, maybe religion, maybe abortion, maybe the death penalty, maybe politics in this country, folk talk over others, or folk listen to someone, then they say their view, as opposed to saying that person's right on this issue, or that and so forth. Or why can't the person who has a different view from you be just as sincere as you are? Well, George Wright has a view, but as my wife of 51 and a half years would tell you, she doesn't agree with me on most stuff, right? So how do I expect you all, I'm gonna come in here and talk about race and you all are gonna agree with me when my own wife doesn't agree with me on race, You see, but it's important to have the dialogue. If you don't talk about issues, you can't. So that's what I would say when I've talked to folk. I've said, let's just have conversations, especially when we're not mad about something. Do you know, I have had white students and folks say to me, why do black folk do that? I said, good question. I wonder why do black folk do that as well? So if you ever thought that, brothers thought that as well, in that regard. So it's important to have the dialogue so we can move beyond in that sense. So that would be my response.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. I have another one online from Deborah Soul. She says, being on the admissions committee at the medical school, we have made great strides in our faculty, but still lose some of our best and brightest, particularly Black students, to private and out-of-state schools. Any thoughts on what more we can do in the professional schools? Yeah.
I spoke over at the College of Dentistry back during homecoming this year, and they were telling me about the efforts that they go through only to lose people to, as was mentioned, private schools. I probably don't have the answer to that, other than here's what I think really matters in a graduate program is the mentor relationship you have with your main professors. And so again, the two universities that I have advanced degrees from, UK and Duke, granted, I received funding from them, but it's because these professors recruited me and showed interest in me that was the main reason. But that is no question, that is a real challenge there. So I'm not answering it, I'm acknowledging it. And so again, like when the person in the back said, what percentage of students of color does UK have? I said, when I tell you the number, I'm also gonna say, but let's put it into context. For me, it's the effort that people put forward. Sometimes you don't always succeed, but it doesn't mean for a lack of commitment. Is UK's medical school, a question, putting forth the right commitment? Do peer schools, Illinois, Ohio State, and so forth, do they lose Black students for the same reasons that UK loses Black students to private schools? If they do, then I would argue that UK is doing the right thing. If UK is losing them and it's something in addition to money, then what is UK doing to fill that gap is what I would say.
Okay, we'll pop up here. Hi, Dr. Wright. My name is Amanda Millscutt-Wright, and I just want to thank you for coming back and engaging with us. I have a point to make and a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The first point was, Fritz, your story was awesome. And as we think about defining and building what the LAC is responsible for, I know one of our taglines is that we are history holders, and that was a really great example of that. So just encourage everyone that's on the LAC and thinking about how to make that group successful, that we keep top of mind part of our mission to be history holders. And so it's like, how do we capture and share those stories? So that's just a point that we can all pin and think about for tomorrow. My question for you, Dr. Wright, is, right now, the Alumni Association is working on our strategic plan for the foreseeable future, coming off the heels of the universities, and would love your recommendations, both with all of your history and knowledge, but also as an extension of the president's office. If you could, in your wildest dreams, ask for the university to go after 2 to 3, let's say, initiatives or strategies as related to advancing DE&I at the university, I'd love to hear what you would recommend.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your asking, and if you don't mind, if you're serious about that, I could follow back up in a conversation or something like that with you. Again, as an alum of UK, without knowing the internal workings of the Alumni Association, I have always felt welcome and engaged as far as being an alum of UK. I don't know what you all say, but I tell folk all the time, I love the University of Kentucky. I said, if it's possible to love an institution, then I love UK. Now, somebody will then tell me some problem at UK, and I'd say, but you know what? That does not mitigate. I didn't say University of Kentucky was perfect or anything like that. No more when I say anything is perfect, but is the University of Kentucky striving to incorporate all of us who are alums and provide opportunities? Here's what I would say. I have, and I don't know about you, I have a responsibility to try to make sure that people coming behind me have the same opportunities I had. You see, I'm not exaggerating. Somebody's saying, he made that story up. He wasn't that bad in high school. I was worse than that. You think about it. The one reason I did good at UK was that I had a mind that had never been used. Though that doesn't make sense to say either. That doesn't make sense either. But I had people help me. Here's a generalization, okay? Here's a George Wright generalization criticism about universities today. Okay, so if it's a generalization, that doesn't have, I don't believe people today help young people like they help me. I don't believe people like me today say to a young person who's making a C or a D in my class, young lady, I bet you're a better student than that. What's the deal? History is not, this history, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Come on, that's not hard, right? And what's hard about this course? Nothing. So if you're not doing well in my course, maybe it's something else. People cared about me. Do you know what? You mentioned, the lady in the back mentioned that there were few Black students. I didn't find it patronizing back in 1968, 69, and so forth, for a professor to say to me, George, you're the only Black student in this class and blah, blah, this. I really wish you the best. I didn't find it was true, right? I couldn't hide it, right? It never got, that people went out of their way. How many people today, I say this because it comes easy to me. You see, my mama told me that I was not smart. And if anybody ever told me I was smart, I need to look at them and say, well, you obviously haven't met many smart people. So I'm clear about that. But how many people today tell young people that they're smart and that they can be exactly what you are or more? Every semester, I met with my class 2 days ago. I said, you know what's the best thing about this class? I said, here's the absolutely best. You're going to learn something, but I'm going to learn even more from you. My intellectual base is going to grow because I'm learning from you. You all are smarter instinctively than me. So my point of generalization is, are we really encouraging young folk? Are we afraid of folk who have ideas different than ours, right? In that regard. So that's what I would urge you to do. I think in some ways, it's easier to give your goal than it is your time. Now, maybe since I don't have any goal, I'm saying that. Al, you all know when someone's trying to do some humor. Okay, but I think it's easier to write a check than to give some time working with someone. And I'm trying to work on that. I'm trying to work on giving some of my time to help young people reach their goals. You know what? I have to believe going to school during this COVID environment is far harder than going to school when I was their age. I mean, this is something about this whole deal is extraordinarily difficult. You know, my wife and I, for almost a year, from March 2020 to August 2021, we were pretty much isolated in our home, but we at least had each other. I have a 30-year-old son who's a professional, and they sent them home. Fortunately, he got paid and continued to work. From March 2020, he has not gone physically back to work yet. And do you know what? My son has called me more times on the phone in 1 year than he did in 30 other years. I mean, Lord, he calls me and asks me about the weather, for heaven's sake. Now, what does that tell you? Gee, so I just have to believe kids even less mature than my son might be having a hard time. So I would just say that I think we've got to find a way to really give of ourselves to young people. So I would challenge you without knowing what you're really doing. That's what I would say. And for me, it's of all races. Please understand that even though I'm African-American, even though my work has been primarily in those things, worry about what must it be like sometime to be a white person. Does it sound crazy for a brother to be saying that? But I do. You know what? Here at UK and everywhere else, they're talking about all these issues. And so can you imagine being a white kid in my class and say, oh, Lord, please don't let me say the wrong thing. What am I supposed to say here? Last year here at UK, I'm in a meeting and they said BIPOC. I said, what? What is, and so I wrote it down. I called someone after class and they said it means biracial, blah, blah. Lord have mercy. I didn't know what it meant. So does every white kid know what BIPOC means? I bet they don't. You see? So I think we got to find the place. And I would also say, and maybe you all don't understand, why can't we be more forgiving in society than we are? Have you all noticed how many times somebody makes a mistake and we just, you know, they cannot recover from that? Isn't the university the place where folk ought to learn? And part of learning is, now I understand folk doing some things that are mean-spirited and so forth, and that you have to punish them. But you know what, when I was a college president, one of the things I liked about it was that I would get recommendation on all these kids who were being disciplined and so forth, and a lot of times being thrown out of school. And every kid that came up to me and said, you know what, I'm going to whip you, I'm going to get a lawyer and all that, I said, not a problem. Everybody who cried and so forth, I just said, just cry a little bit. We can get out of here with some tears, right? Just tell me you're sorry. Admit it, right? Why can't we be forgiving? Okay, so I don't know if these answer your questions, but this is how I think about some of the things we need to be doing.
All right, we have one last thing on Zoom today. Frank Ferris, you are live if you want to speak to the room.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. Dr. Wright, first of all, like you and like my good friend Fritz, I also remember getting a letter saying I wouldn't make it, but I can tell you after the first round of midterms, I didn't think I was going to make it. But ultimately things sorted itself out and it worked out. You may not remember this, but I do. I was the alumni president and got to share the stage with you in 2004 when you received your honorary doctorate. And I was like, wow, this guy's about the same age as me and look at all the stuff he's done. And I was just really, really impressed. And I really, all I wanted to say was, Hearing what you had to say today, the words are phenomenal. There's so much. It always encourages a guy like me, same age, to see someone as youthful as you still out spreading the word every day. And so thank you for doing that. And thank you for coming back to this university. And on behalf of all of us, I'd like to say thank you for spending your time with us today.
Well, thank you. Sure, I can turn it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. I really appreciate it. Every time you come and speak, you sort of take me back to school. I learn something all the time. If it's not African-American history, it's American history. But one thing I will go look up is African diasporas. First, I need to learn how to spell diaspora, so I'm gonna get with you on that. But very fascinating. And I really appreciate you taking time to be with us here today. One of the things that also resonated with me was how you talked about us as people getting an understanding of one another. And I think we forget how basic that may be, but understanding one another, then we can sort of reconcile and move forward. And I really appreciate you highlighting that and reminding us of that as people, because I truly feel that's the only way we can move forward. Also, I'd like to note, as you were speaking, and that rung a bell in my head, because I just recently saw a movie on Netflix, for those who watch Netflix, but it's called The Best of Enemies. It was written after the book, but Best of Enemies, where you had a KKK member and a African lady. They was trying to, they was debating. In essence, they had to sit down with the group of people, Black and white, and get an understanding of, these are things that we have challenges with. And these, on the other side, these are challenges of the white people. And how do we move forward? And that movie resonates and sort of exemplifies what you were saying. So if any of you guys get an opportunity and don't know what that is, take a look at that movie. It highlights exactly what you were saying. So really appreciate your time today. I think we had our first break.
Good afternoon. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here today to this amazing dream event where we're going to imagine the possibilities when we reach higher and dream bigger. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Mary Shellman, and I'm president of the Alumni Association this year. My apologies that I couldn't be here this morning. I had another university responsibility that was, one, extremely important. It's important to this association and also extremely important to the university. So I just couldn't say no to do it. And but I knew that you were in very good hands, but I'm really sorry. And I'm delighted to be here now with you for the rest of the time. Thanks for traveling to Lexington. For those of you that came in, and cross your fingers for me. So I live in Boston. Yesterday morning, my flight down was fantastic. I'm supposed to go back on Sunday. So if you guys could say an extra prayer that I actually get out before the snowstorm, because whatever they're predicting now, 6 to 9 inches of snow might be, it's nothing in Boston, right? It kind of slows us down for a morning. But here I know it's absolutely kind of crippling to the situation. So just say that little prayer. But so I'm really excited this afternoon to introduce our lunchtime speaker, Dr. Robert DiPaola, who is going to share some of the things that he's been up to particularly over the last few months, as he's been the acting provost for the university. But he has also the dean of the College of Medicine and the vice president of clinical academic affairs at UK Healthcare for the past 5.5 years. And so like many of us, like myself, Bob is a first generation college graduate. And I think that's something that's so important here at this university. And he completed his medical degree at the University of Iowa. And then after graduation, he pursued an internal medicine residency at that other blue university that we might know as having UK in the middle of it and 4 letters. But we'll forgive him for that, followed by a fellowship in hematology, oncology at the University of Pennsylvania. So he has a huge amount of experience. He's published tons of publications in prestigious journals like New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet. He's chaired multiple national committees, so amazing type of person to be here. And at the University of Kentucky as dean, of the College of Medicine. He's led and managed all aspects of that with approximately 1,100 full-time faculty, so a huge number, and 2,000 learners. And he's also led the efforts of a statewide 4-year program campus expansion, because as many of you know, we're short on doctors in the state. So how do we get more doctors without, capacity here on campus to teach is limited. So we have these new partnerships, 2 new full campuses in Bowling Green and another in Northern Kentucky. He's also launched new research initiatives that's led to more funding. But importantly for us, as acting provost, he's helped lead the strategic planning process, which is something, as you all know, we are very much engaged in. And myself and the members of our executive committee really appreciated the willingness, Bob, to let us be involved in that strategic planning process for the university and have some input on to that. So he's going to talk about that at lunchtime. He's also involved in the university accreditation process, which is going on now, and the COVID response efforts, which unfortunately seems like they're never going away. So join me in welcoming Bob DiPaola.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that very much. And I guess I was going to try to do this with a mask, but I'm at a distance. I have food or drink, so I'll try to stay a distance, and otherwise I'm going to fog up my glasses. But I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you all as well. I want to particularly thank Mary and her executive team, because their input to the strategic plan, I mean, she mentioned it only casually or lightly, was really instrumental. And she may realize it or not, but if you actually read through the full plan, I could highlight so many spots that in areas that were really enhanced by their efforts as well. And I'll talk through the overall process in a moment. And I have some slides I was going to go through. Well, I'll go through. Some of the slides, kind of show pictures that relate to, or data that relates to, our COVID response, because I kind of feel like that's the backdrop of what we're dealing with. And so I thought to not say anything about, COVID and how we're dealing with it is probably would be remiss. So I'll say a bit about that. I'm going to also talk then about the strategic plan. At the end, I will touch a bit on the reaffirmation process, or reaccreditation process, just because that's a big part of what's going through the university, or going on in the university over this next year. The actual submission of our reaccreditation for the whole university goes in September. And then there's an actual visit. We believe it will be in person, but you never know. Could always be Zoom the following year. And the strategic plan actually informs that. So it really does make sense and dovetail with the strategic plan. So you could say I'm going to try to focus on the strategic plan, but at least touch a number of other areas. And I'll try to do that while you're eating lunch, and giving you an opportunity to interact and ask some questions as well. I guess I can look over there. So the things I was kind of put on the agenda include, as I mentioned a moment ago, the COVID strategy, the strategic plan update. This term transdisciplinary approaches is really going to be a big part of the strategic plan. And so I wanted to highlight that in particular. And as I mentioned, I'll just touch on the reaffirmation process, or reaccreditation process. If you go to the next slide. So just in terms of COVID-19, and you don't have to go through all of this. One of the things that we did with the campus when COVID first hit, now we're talking not this past year, but the year before, quite a while ago, was there were a number of structures, committees, and so forth set up by the university that included both committees that would help inform, look at the evidence, because remember, it was emerging pretty rapidly, as well as implement the evidence. There was an emergency operations committee that was set up out of Eric Monday and his office and team, and that was built so that operations could occur in a nimble way as evidence and guidelines changed. I don't know if you remember way back then, but at first we didn't even know COVID passed through aerosol that even a mask would matter. In fact, some of the early evidence was like even unclear whether that was the case. Everybody thought it was surface spreading, like the common cold has been talked about in the past. So there's a lot since then that we've learned. Obviously, we weren't even thinking about variants then. Now we really understand variants. We understand the fact that we're going to have to, continue to look at, boosters, and I can talk about that a little bit in a moment, or you may have some thoughts or questions about it. But the bottom line is there needed to be an infrastructure, and what was set up under the president through the emergency operations group was a number of committees, and it was almost like a continuum you could look at where we had a group, we called it the START team. I have a slide on that. I'll just show you that in a moment. We called it the START team, and what we brought together were the experts on the evidence. So public health experts, medical experts, scientific experts, virologists, all in a group that would meet very regularly, and for a while even meet daily to look at the emerging evidence and what was going on in terms of guidelines from the CDC, and make guidelines or advice, or give advice for guidelines to the campus that would fit the campus, because obviously we had some unique needs. And what was created was a really public health infrastructure. Obviously, the things at the bottom there were critically important in terms of vaccines and masks and screening and testing. I don't need to go into that in detail, but really recommendations were made in all different areas. And if we could go to the next slide, I'll show you at least the result, I think, of one of the most important sets of data or statistics in terms of the campus was the fact that we understood that vaccination was critically important. And in fact, the most critically important thing that we could do and target, and that was increasing the vaccination rate. And I remember when we started getting vaccinations out, everybody was a bit skeptical that we could even get to the 70%, 80% level of vaccination rate. And you can see we've hit the 90% level and 91% for the campus, even a bit higher in healthcare. So down at the bottom right, you can see the 93.1%. And then the breakdown, depending on what component of the campus that you look at. Now that's primary vaccination. With Omicron, we're in a bit of a new world again to now encourage, and then with a plan to incentivize booster injections, because it does appear that boosters are incredibly important, especially with Omicron. So anybody who's gotten primary vaccinations, it looks like even with Omicron, it will decrease serious illness, but Omicron is still transmissible even with vaccination. Omicron becomes less transmissible and it decreases serious illness even further to get a booster. And there's a lot of talk and research going on and studies trying to develop additional boosters down the road that might be more specific to a variety of variants that can arise. So bottom line is that we've done everything possible to keep ahead of it. We're going to need to push further in terms of booster doses. And then obviously masks have become even more important again. We never stopped our mask mandate on the campus, meaning everybody wears masks indoors except when you're eating. We've been pretty careful about that. And obviously we need to keep adherent to it. The other thing that I'll mention, and this is from a research medical perspective, is that it's interesting, and you'll see this going forward, is that medical technology in terms of the development of these types of vaccines is at a new level. It's a new platform. In fact, it's probably like an analogous difference to gas cars and electric cars. This model of RNA vaccines, it sounds straightforward, and you've seen it explained in terms of what it is, but it's actually an incredible platform that just never existed before. And what it allows, the researchers to do and the pharmaceutical companies when they develop this is you can, just as if you were typing in a computer, you can tailor the code of the RNA that's going to go into the vaccine to actually then tailor the immune response. So it can be very tailored. They just need to now identify what proteins they want to go after. And so they have an opportunity to kind of go after proteins that would cover, not only the current variant, but future variants. The point is that it can be done in a very nimble, very rapid way. Whereas before it was much more crude, where you would just have to find the virus. So Omicron comes up. Now you have to take the Omicron, kill it, make it not infective. And people would be injecting essentially components of the original virus so people got immune to it. So you don't need to do that any longer with this new platform. It doesn't mean those aren't useful, they, in different ways. But anyway, bottom line is, boosters are going to be important, or I should say vaccines are important. Boosters are particularly important now. And we're going to need to keep kind of working on that. But the good news is that the technology is really incredible at this point, so that can be done rapidly. Next slide, if we could. So anyway, this is the list of things. I'm just going to summarize, and then I'll go on kind of the next topic. But again, paying attention to masks. The other thing about masks is we're going to probably be paying more attention to the type of mask. You can see the research on that, especially with Omicron, because it's so transmissible, that, just any old cloth mask probably isn't, what we already knew wasn't as good, but with the Delta variant and the prior variants, they weren't as transmissible, and even a simple cloth mask was much more effective. Now you would have to even think about the order of things. So the best mask is an N95 or a KN95. Then you get to a multi-layer cloth mask. Actually, these are pretty thick, so these are multi-layered. In between surgical masks, and then some people actually double mask. So you could imagine that enhances as well. But just some of the simple cloth masks that may just be even a couple layers are probably not as good as they once were felt to be with the prior variant. So we're gonna probably have more on that as time goes on. In terms of testing, we continue to do that, especially those that are unvaccinated. We have a mandated policy that everybody on the campus either gets vaccinated or they have to test very frequently. And then we have various isolation procedures. You can see that evolving pretty rapidly. Even the CDC recommendations, with now 5 days of isolation if somebody gets COVID, within 5 days of masking, but then again, we're masking indoors anyway. I mentioned the START team. That's the evidence-based team that meets on a regular basis to look at the evidence that's out there. There is a COVID advisory team. There's actually two teams. One is more on the pure advisory end, one's more on the operations end. And then Health Corps, which is absolutely incredible. It is a team that operationalizes everything. It's literally a 1-800 number that anyone can call, even when they have a question about themselves. Gee, I'm worried about this. I had this symptom. I tried to get this test. This is what it did. What do I do? I had this student. I had this faculty member. Whatever it may be, Health Corps is there. So that got operationalized through this process. In fact, there's thoughts and plans to have some version of Health Corps in the future here, forevermore, as an organization and group where for wellness and health related issues for the whole campus at any point, they can pay attention to a number of things, even once we get past, say, maybe some of the surges of COVID, even though I think we're all agreeing that we're going to have to live with COVID one way or another. So next slide, if I could. So the campus, I just wanted to give you a glimpse of where we are, because we have, and you saw the president's, you probably saw the president's message that we were just back this past week in person, but with extra care in terms of masking, working on the vaccinations, working on more booster opportunities and that kind of thing. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how we've learned in terms of the fact that we are a very residential campus. There are a lot of services for our students. It benefits the students very much to have access to advisors and counselors, as well as in-person learning. And some of the learning obviously requires in-person, especially when you think on the clinical end. But we need to do it in a safe way. But I just want to show you that the blue is that traditional UK in-person experience. And if you look at fall of 2018, you can see how much blue. You can see in that fall, this is just the fall, and I'll show you in a moment the spring, the fall 2019. But then look what happened in fall 2020. It really fell off. We had to deal with a lot of learning and opportunities. And then fall 2021, again, coming back to the way we've had an experience for our students here on the campus. And then the next slide, if we could go to that, shows kind of the analogous percentages. I didn't have a pie graph for that, but if you look at the spring 2020, it was right before as COVID was just getting understood, it was 92% traditional, and then dropped in spring of 2021 to 32%. And then now we're at 89, almost 90%. We're being a little careful now. Obviously, there's still some flexibility. We're ready to pivot if needed. As we see how Omicron might peak. Some of the data nationally, by the way, in Omicron would suggest that the peak should occur like this weekend, but sometimes it occurs later. So we're going to have to watch that, because once you get the peak, then you start to see, the numbers come down. But I can tell you the numbers in terms of the state or nation, they were more today than they were yesterday. So, it's not clear yet we've hit the peak, but, it's supposed to be a pretty rapid peak. But that's with modeling, and obviously it's not perfect. In fact, if you wear masks a lot and everybody has, the types of, safety measures we have on campus, sometimes you slow the amount of transmission to others, but you also delay the peak a bit. So it might vary a little bit in terms of our environment, our local environment. But from a national perspective, they're thinking we're pretty close to, the peaking in terms of Omicron, we hope, and then it would start to come down. The next slide, though, is just, I'm not going to go through the details, but just the importance of, because when I talk about the strategic plan in a moment in a bit more detail, one of the things we keep focusing on is what's best for the students. And when you talk about the backdrop that I just mentioned, which is the backdrop of Omicron and worrying about in person or not, what we've learned is that students perform better when they're in person. So now it doesn't mean that we don't have hybrid models where there's some integration of some online opportunities. You want to integrate that. You want to have those opportunities. And this was just showing that there was even a decrease when things had gone fully online in terms of even GPA. And that was even in the short run. In the long run, the data even nationally would suggest that academic performance goes down when people are just totally online in educational environments. So it is something to consider as we move forward in terms of strategy for student success, and I'll get to that. And the next slide really talks about mental health, and it's really it's everybody. It's not just students. This particular article was focused on students and student mental health. And again, when students are isolated, and this is in many different settings, this is not only it's also undergrad and also K through 12, and in isolated situations, just more stress and burnout. And from a university perspective, we've seen increasing rates of mental health concerns, suicidal ideation, and so forth. And so it really does have a number of unintended consequences unless it's done in a strategic way as a part of the whole, including the services that are important in person, counseling and advising, and mental health and many other opportunities for well-being and networking with other students and so forth. So very important to think about in that context. If you could go to the next slide. So let me talk about the strategic plan now in that backdrop of COVID. But even before I go to the next slide, let me just say that, for what I've just talked about, we're dealing with the challenge of, the backdrop of COVID, the challenge of mental health concerns that are escalating around the nation. But, with the numbers you saw and us being able to bring back students in a safe way, monitor it in a careful way, and having measures to mitigate transmission as best possible, isolating when needed. We're doing everything possible to continue to maintain, and so far we've been successful in maintaining a fairly healthy infrastructure for these students. With that said, and in that backdrop, this past year and certainly the past 6 months, we went through an extensive process in strategic planning. It was planned to actually happen the year before, but a bit delayed when COVID hit. And I can tell you this process, maybe perhaps more than any other than maybe even the COVID, maybe even better than the COVID guidelines, has gotten input from the campus and beyond. And as I mentioned, your input, Mary's help, and others has been instrumental in terms of what came out of the strategic plan. The strategic plan, if we could go to the next slide, is actually, well, I don't think the title of the strategic plan is at the top, but if you pull it up on the website, it is now called the UK Purpose. And I won't read off the acronym, but purpose actually is an acronym that means something, but it makes a lot of sense. And it's the purpose to advance Kentucky. So you'll see even kind of the tagline for all this is it's now the UK purpose to advance Kentucky, and beyond, without a doubt. And it was not only extensively vetted, input gained, from the campus, but from key groups. I mentioned you all and Mary's group, and many of the other different groups, our International Center, for example, as well. The key leadership groups throughout the campus, the leadership group that is Senate Council, that represents the faculty, leadership group that represents the staff senate, leadership group that represents the students in terms of the SGA, and most importantly, the Board of Trustees involvement. In fact, there was a retreat to give input from the Board of Trustees. It was endorsed. There was even follow-up following that to at least have at least acknowledgement and any other additional input related to the tactics and metrics. Most of the retreat really dealt with input over the tactics. So this strategic plan, I'm not going to go through the granularity of it, but you can certainly pull it up, but includes 5 principles. And I was just going to read those off and tell you a little bit about each of those. But the 5 principles underneath that have a number of objectives. The objectives then have tactics to actually implement the objectives. And then there are metrics, or at least an initial set of metrics we're following. And as I mentioned, the Board of Trustees as well was very instrumental in giving advice. In fact, there were all kinds of breakout groups, and the advice was incorporated, and the president had a follow-up with the Board of Trustees to talk about how that was incorporated and move forward. Right now, with a completed strategic plan, the next steps will be an implementation process. So there will be an overall oversight team for implementation, and then there'll be sub-teams because all the areas are a bit different in terms of what gets implemented. And you're going to hear more about that as the next few months go on. I think this past month, everybody was very busy just getting the campus back for the most part. So let me tell you a little bit about, now I'll leave this slide on so that you don't have to go through a lot of slides, and just go through a little bit about the five key principles. The first principle, putting students first, was really one that I can tell you all of the groups I just mentioned spent a lot of time on, because really the basis of what we do here is how we continue to grow, that next generation of, of workforce, of healthcare workers, of all the types of innovation and things that, improve our economy, our health, our well-being in different ways. So to help our students in a number of different ways. And one objective, I'm going to just talk a little bit about one of the first objectives, without getting into like I said, the weeds on this. But one objective is to expand, and I'm reading this, is to expand on the existing foundation of a focused, intentional, purpose-driven curricular and extracurricular experience with statewide and global relevance, led and fostered by faculty and staff excellence. And that particular objective had a lot of discussion because it's kind of key. It's really the curriculum across the board. And it's saying that no matter whether or not a student comes in and plans to be an engineer or a biologist or an English teacher or teacher, it's really getting kind of a purpose-driven approach that has relevance, statewide and global relevance. And I'll tell you just a little bit of a vignette or story related to that. Recently, maybe it was about a month or so ago, I had the privilege of going out to Austin, Texas with Commerce Lexington, and got to it was almost a 3-day set of or symposium, different lectures and different sessions and so forth. And it was really looking at what's important for the future workforce and not just Lexington, but Lexington and beyond. And it was also borrowing from analogies and presentations that came from Austin, where a lot has grown, especially in the tech area. I think now Tesla and so forth. Just a lot of opportunities there. We had, by the way, a great alumni event, and I have to thank Jill and Christina, wherever she is, in the back, swooped in and had an event, and I think we had probably 40, 50 alumni here from UK that were just so loyal to to the University of Kentucky and excited about how their careers had launched, incredibly successful careers. In fact, there are a number of follow-ups in terms of some potential donors, even after that. But most importantly, we could see how we've enriched, that 40 or 50 which were students in terms of their lives, even though it might have been another city. Obviously we're enriching lives around the country and beyond. There were a lot of engineers. There were a few lawyers, a lot of engineers, less physicians, but there were, it was really a variety, more or less, a number of those that had graduated in business as well. What that symposium really did, and it pointed out throughout the 3 days, was the importance of us paying attention to what we're doing when we support programs, develop programs, especially with the strategic plan, this objective, that are making sense for where our students go, meaning the workforce eventually. It got into things like essential skills. What are the essential skills? And actually some follow-up to that got into even more detail, more granularity over this. What do we really want to make sure all students learn? I mean, we always talk about it. Gee, we want them to have good communication skills. We want to have good critical thinking skills, and so on. But how do you do that? How do you monitor it? There'll be a lot of attention in the strategic plan in setting up infrastructure to be able to do that, so that our students come out and you can say, if you've gotten a degree at UK, whether it's an undergrad degree, is a bachelor's or beyond, they are well trained in and those types of skills, and we want to make sure that makes sense. The other thing is partnerships. There's an emphasis over partnerships even early on, so that students actually have an understanding and a network already, so that they know that they have a greater likelihood of landing a job in something that they're passionate about, as opposed to getting out there and having to switch job to job to job, and not necessarily having something that they're passionate about in their particular field. And so I think there's going to be a lot more on that as you all think and advise and help, thinking about how there are opportunities to connect with businesses and workforce, and help us from the UK perspective align these programs, these educational programs, with those particular companies and so forth, and sectors. So that was one thing that came up a lot in Austin was, they were thinking a lot about the tech sector, so to speak. But there are opportunities in Kentucky that are unique as well. And I'll talk a little more about some of the unique aspects of the University of Kentucky to help with the workforce needs, some unique niche opportunities that we have in a moment. In terms of taking care of our people, one of the objectives, and again, I'm only giving you an example of each, is to enhance the highest levels of holistic wellness for faculty, staff, and students by expanding comprehensive, integrated structures to support working and learning environments where all may flourish and thrive. Very important. There are a lot of aspects to that. I mean, this is kind of a high-level objective, but in terms of the tactics, it's really getting at trying to identify mental health and issues, burnout, where we need to intervene, where we need to have those touch points across, say, a student's experience, but also paying attention to faculty and staff. I think the third one is inspiring ingenuity, but I'm going to just mention that last. Let me just go to in terms of ensuring greater trust, transparency, and accountability. One of the objectives there, just to be somewhat brief, but it's important, an important principle and objective, is to ensure a more responsive institution that can timely adapt when necessary or during challenges, assess language and application of university guidance and policies to better structure and define roles with respect to the bedrock principle of shared governance among faculty, staff, faculty, students, staff, and administrators. And this, there's a lot in that objective, but the couple pieces that really came out and the tactics follow is continuing to pay attention to structures that are more nimble, because things change more rapidly and we need to be nimble. Look at our existing policies, our existing approval processes, and so forth, but do it in a shared governance way. So making sure everybody's at the table as those get sorted out. But very important to be honest. Again, the transparency piece as well. The other principle, bringing together many people, One of the objectives, again, that highlights at least the essence of that is to broadly demonstrate and communicate the value of diversity of the UK campus to the Commonwealth of Kentucky and to the global community to create more interaction and involvement between campus and communities on diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. And again, that's something with all of your connections to the community and beyond are going to be very important in terms of getting advice, in terms of helping us make sure we do that. And then the inspiring ingenuity, I said I would just mention last, an objective, and this is going to dovetail into this whole topic of a transdisciplinary approach. One of the objectives, which you might imagine in this area, is to build upon the strengths in research and creative work to address a broader range of local, national, and global challenges, the solutions to which will attract prosperity and well-being to Kentucky and its citizens. And this is important in a number of different ways. So when we're talking about research and creative work, and especially research is a good model to think about. And I'm going to talk about research a little bit, what this means in terms of this particular objective, because we understand how research can grow when you think about a more team-like approach. And when we talk about a transdisciplinary approach, we're talking about a team-like approach. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And now the question is how do we leverage what we have at UK that's somewhat unique amongst many of the programs people can reach out to get learning. So right now, somebody can get an online program from Coursera, or there's Google has a program, Amazon. I mean, there's so many different programs out there where you can get an online certificate, for example. But the one thing you got to always ask, what's our niche here? Well, our niche here is that we have an incredibly comprehensive campus. So if somebody wants to learn about business analytics, sure, you can take an online isolated course, and that's good. And those programs are great, because they do certain things, they get people into jobs and so forth. But here you can learn where you can almost think about, we have some optimal space and time, and I'll explain that in a moment. But you can learn from, the leadership in a college of business, the business analytics, and that can tie in a program that's more liberal arts like, and you're learning liberal arts, from, again, the expertise in whatever particular area in liberal arts that might be. And it's the expertise of, of scholars that are doing the teaching, who are leading the field, changing standards and so forth. And so when you combine kind of the power of, in that case, the College of Business and Arts and Sciences, College of Arts and Sciences, what someone gets as a student is, the highest level of expertise, even for that one program or that one course or that one certificate. And the other thing they get is kind of the timeline of taking that on a path, if they wanted to the next step and to the next step, to a bachelor's, eventually a terminal degree. So we have the full extent to terminal degrees, and we have the full breadth in terms of not just business analytics, but by the expertise that would be in a whole college of business, not just English, but by the whole expertise in the College of Arts and Sciences as well. So when you think about the campus that way, and we have such a comprehensive campus, you can think about the transdisciplinary approach and the programs we set up as being somewhat powerful and unique for any student or anybody who wanted to learn. And it could be somebody who's a student starting on their path, and so you kind of think of a pipeline to go ahead and getting a bachelor's and further degrees perhaps, but it could also be somebody with kind of more lifelong learning as well. The other thing that I think is important in this regard is thinking about the workforce needs. We've been spending a lot of time thinking about and working on plans, and we've already been doing it in truth over the past number of years on the healthcare workforce. And Mary nicely mentioned and was kind enough to mention a lot of work we put in by many people, not just myself, to create new campuses for the College of Medicine. But at its core, the reason for that, the purpose of that, is because we need more physicians to deal with the healthcare needs. And to do that, we needed more seats. We just couldn't do it in Lexington. We just didn't have the capacity. And then also by having regional campuses, you offer opportunities to those regions to enhance those regions and also enhance the experiences of those students in those various local regions. So we now have a campus for the College of Medicine, not only in Lexington, we have Northern Kentucky, and we have Bowling Green, and we have out in Moorhead, a rural physician leadership program as well. And if we can, I think that I've talked about it before. There are plans to kind of work towards a true health education building, a new facility that would even give us more capacity, not only here in Lexington, but also to have more arms out there to expand even further as well. And there was a donor as well, Dr. Mike Rankin, who was announced of giving a $22 million donation to kind of seed the beginnings of a new College of Medicine building. And now the plans are even grown beyond just physicians and College of Medicine, but to also include plans for growing nursing and physical therapists and physician's assistants, and also to help enhance what we do in public health. So there are a lot of opportunities in terms of growing our healthcare workforce. And so paying attention to workforce as we bring those groups together is going to be more important as well. And I'll go to the next slide. Since I kind of highlighted the principles, let me just go to the slide. I just want to hit a little bit further on this transdisciplinary approach, because I hit that one objective pretty heavily because I do think a big niche in our educational programs does relate to this transdisciplinary concept of bringing colleges together to really create more powerful educational opportunities. But let me take a step back and say, how did it create research opportunities by having that same approach? So we have researchers across the campus in all different ways. If you go to the next slide, this is kind of that concept of a transdisciplinary approach. Maybe don't worry about the text to the left, but if you look at that graph to the right, and this is borrowed, it really actually defines the difference between transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, unidisciplinary. And I have to admit, back a while ago, I didn't really think about it. You kind of say those words and you don't really know, I didn't know what I was saying or so forth. But the concept of transdisciplinary is really important, because what it's saying is you do everything possible to bring people to the table, those other disciplines, that expertise, earlier in the process. So even at the planning phase, you don't get it to the point where everybody's already planned it independently. Agriculture has its program already in doing genomics in horses, and College of Medicine has its program in doing genomic sequencing in humans, and they're already well developed, and then they come together. If you came together earlier, you'd come out with a better product, at least is the point about this. So you always get to the point of getting at the point of the question or the problem and bringing people together. So we're trying to set up mechanisms, and it cuts across not only the objective I just mentioned, but really many of the objectives, especially the one I said first, which was the putting students first, and the curricular objective I mentioned earlier. This concept of how do we bring together in a transdisciplinary approach, because that is a unique niche for a comprehensive campus like the University of Kentucky. And on the research end, so I'm going to show you an example on the next slide, just one example, if you could. This is just asking the question, how do we have teams of research in key areas that are important for the health disparities of Kentucky? And so you might say, well, how do you measure the research strength in neuroscience? So very high incidence of problems related to stroke, for example, in Kentucky. Cancer, very high incidence of cancer in Kentucky. Cardiovascular, same thing, diabetes, obesity, and addiction or substance use disorder. And probably one of the best measures, if not the best measure, of research strength, of research, foundational research that can lead to discovery and then impact the healthcare of any particular state or beyond, would be the ability of its researchers to gain federal funding or external funding where they had to compete with everybody else in the world and certainly in the nation for those funds. And it's peer reviewed, it's really difficult. And the blue bars represent, this actually just looks at NIH funding, National Institute of Health funding across Kentucky. And you can just see the growth. This is, obviously how strong the UK is. Now, it doesn't mean that other institutions aren't. But if you were to ask me then, how did that look after, in prior years? It's been a steep trajectory. In fact, almost a doubling in the last 4 or 5 years. And if you'd say, well, how did that happen? It was basically a transdisciplinary approach. Back a number of years ago, the vice president for research and certainly the College of Medicine, very involved, especially in those areas, said, you know what, we're going to really emphasize incentivizing every way, shape, or form team approaches, not this isolated researcher here doing something by themselves. And so what this is representing is growth in those team-like awards, because when you bring together researchers of different disciplines together and then they're applying for these awards, it's a much more powerful grant and it has more impact, and it usually brings in more support as well. So, and there are many examples. I'm not going to go through them, but you see them all the time that get reported out at UK Now. Discovery this and discovery that. You saw Sharon Walsh's leadership, and it wasn't just by herself and a team to get the largest substance use disorder addiction award ever. Probably I think it's the largest single award we've ever received here, and it was $90 million for substance use disorder. That was the HEAL grant. Again, a team-like approach. And actually her team, one of the awards we gave back, now it's 5 years ago, we launched an awards program and said, we'll give you this award, we'll give you this fund only if you're a team. Her team actually got one of those awards early 5 years ago. Not that that was the only reason that she ended up getting the HEAL grant later. That was only $200,000. The HEAL grant with the 90 million, but it was, again, that team-like approach. And obviously, a lot of talent coming together thinks in a better way. And then the next slide, if I could show you. So since we've got that kind of niche going, the question is how are we doing that when we look at all the different colleges? And I just list here in just a list of accreditation reviews that I've been part of. And so what I've gotten to see this past 6 months, what I've been able to see, or the pleasure to see, is outside reviewers coming in to do accreditation or reaccreditation of various programs in different colleges. And there's a variety of them that I got to see. And the thing that kept coming up, if you had to ask me, well, what's the common theme you keep hearing from these external reviewers that are reviewing rigorously? It's like a critique or an audit. And they come sometimes for multiple days for a particular program. And there was one in this landscape architecture program that was reviewed. They came in, they reviewed the Gatton College of Business and Economics and their overall and accountant and business program. They reviewed the College of Communication, Information, et cetera, et cetera. Or, well, actually, some of them I think are upcoming already. Actually, communications next week, so it is upcoming. So they reviewed it outside. They'll actually come on site next week. Anyway, bottom line is, if you'd ask me what's the theme that we're seeing, it's, again, that transdisciplinary approach. They are usually amazed with how we're bringing people together, different disciplines, different expertise, and so forth. And the last one, which was already done, is the College of Health Sciences and Athletic Training. This is actually a certified degree or master's where there is a certification, and it basically gets trainers that are really experienced on the rehab end. And granted, it's more more on kind of the athletic end. But if you were to say, well, how do you pick apart that program? That program is multiple disciplines. I mean, it's with health sciences, it's with medicine, it's with UK healthcare. I mean, there's just just so many bridges that you just couldn't do in an institution that wasn't so comprehensive as here. Next slide. And there are other programs being developed. So, and I just threw just the names here: healthcare and law working together, law and business working together. I alluded to already the business analytics working together and they have a minor already, so that with certain liberal arts degrees or majors, students can get the benefit of having that minor in business analytics with liberal arts. So, and you could imagine somebody might have a liberal arts major and go out and start a company or whatever they might do, and certainly be more attractive to the workforce or getting hired if they have that extra minor. But it comes as expertise from multiple colleges. In that case, 2 different colleges. And the same thing with business and engineering. They're also working on pharmacy, and arts and sciences are working together for another program as well. These are just some that are in the works that I wanted to mention, but it just gets that concept together. And now we're actually thinking about various innovation funds where we are going to require, analogous to the research award I mentioned before, awards, we're going to basically say, you're eligible, we'll give you money to start a new program, but you got to have at least 2 colleges, or you got to have at least 2, so it just starts to instill. What's that? Oh, I better get, okay, I'm sorry. I've already taken, no. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead and we'll just finish up the slide. So, and the last thing I'll just only tell you and then finish up and end is and I already mentioned the reaffirmation process. Just because this is big, and one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing, we got to always stay accredited as a university. But if you go through the next slide or two, I'll just tell you that one of the focuses is on a quality enhancement plan where the campus is already given input to help pick one of the options. And if you go to the next slide, those are the topics. And you can see the transdisciplinary is one of them. I don't know if that'll be the one that's picked. So there's a lot of input given. The president gets to pick the final with the input. So they're in the middle of analyzing it. Data-informed decisions, entrepreneurship and innovation, access and equity, and holistic wellness. Doesn't mean we don't do all of these, but there'll be one topic that we tend to focus on. And let me just go to the next slide. This is just a timeline. I already told you about that. And the next slide, I think, is it. Just go back if you could, back to the slide with those QEP things, 2 slides back. Maybe just leave it there for a moment. I'm going to stop, and I don't know, Mary, if there's any time. Maybe I've kind of gone over, and I apologize. But if there's any time for any questions, but is there okay for him? Take a couple questions. Okay. Yeah. No. I'll make time. Maybe what I'll do too is you're thinking about questions. Would anyone like to actually say something about thoughts on? Because I wouldn't mind going back and saying, you all even gave me some thoughts that we weren't thinking about. If we had to pick a campus, it's kind of like a campus project that'll occur over a number of years. There was the project the last time we went through reaccreditation was called Presentation U, and it was to help with communication skills and so forth. But in terms of these topics, anybody want to make a comment about them? Thoughts? If you had to pick one and give advice, yes. Yeah, it's a really good point. And so one of the things that seems to occur is and we've got to work at it, because sometimes you got to always worry and say, can you get a degree in that combined, and it's got to go through a big, long approval process. And so we have to be clever at times. So one way is if somebody gets a major in a liberal arts program or a major in engineering, and they took a minor in business analytics, they're adding a minor. So that's one way to do it. But we're going to need to work on it, because if you look at the history of even research where you tried to do combined team-like approaches, people at first said, well, I don't really get rewarded to go work with that person in the other lab. I'm in a lab and somebody else in a lab, and get an award. Who gets the money? And who gets the recognitions for appointments and promotion? And they've evolved, though, so that they're now multi-PI grants and so forth. So we're going to have to evolve as we do this more in education. I would agree. Other thoughts or comments? Does anyone want to pick? Yeah, he was just saying the entrepreneurship and innovation, and I agree. And you can have, by the way, too, I know it says transdisciplinary educational programs at the top, so it kind of is deceiving. You can be transdisciplinary in any of these, and especially in entrepreneurship and innovation. So that could be a framework, that you use. Also, it could be vice versa too. You can have transdisciplinary educational approaches and have that, still do entrepreneurship and innovation. But I would agree. Anybody else? Oh, I'm sorry.
Not necessarily on, I'm sorry, not necessarily on that one specifically, but it does tie into what Antoine was saying. You'd mentioned under the first objective partnerships, are you talking some career service partnerships as well?
Yes, yeah, and no, exactly. And that would be part of it. And I think that's going to be important because, the more we're connected, I think the more we're connected, the more we'll learn. I think we do some, but we don't do as many as we could in terms of those types of partnerships. And I think we'll get more informed in terms of what that particular, whatever company or, area that might hire would need, want, and it'll help shape what we do, I think. And so we do need to, it's getting back to getting everybody at the table a little bit earlier. So I would agree totally.
I'm not sure what's on. Sorry. To follow up with what Antoine was saying, and full disclosure, I work for the Small Business Development Center. But entrepreneurship and innovation is really important for several reasons. One is that small businesses are driving the majority of the economy, and that even if you don't have your own business, or you go to work for a major company, the individual being of innovation and having an entrepreneurial spirit improves the entire company. We just don't think about that. We have to be responsible for that as just an everyday worker too.
No, thank you. And I think, no, actually, these comments are important and helpful. And I think, just keep in mind too, we're going to be doing all those things, but whatever gets picked as this QEP project for the reaffirmation will fall under the strategic plan and be a big focus. So, and people talk about what's the QEP and all that. So it will get highlighted. So it is important, even in terms of it. So actually, let me do something, because I'm going to take this back. I know this is quick, and it's not like you had a lot of time to vet it and know what all the components are each. But just on a first glance, you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want. But can I see hands if I go through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I just want to get it. Is that okay? Is that all right, Mary? Okay. So I'm going to take us back to the president. I'll get a sense of what everybody came up with here. So for if number of hands, if you had to pick this just without knowing any more than what I just talked about, and I understand that I didn't give you everything, and there's more out there, but you all have a good understanding of a lot of this, if not all of this. How many would pick the QEP, the number 1 QEP? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, got it. How many picked the number 2? 2. Okay. How many would pick number 3? I would have expected, given the comments. 1, 2, 5. Okay, and how many would pick number 4? Okay. All right, that's okay. And number 5. Okay. All right. No, I appreciate it. And keep in mind, so just so too, even like the last one, especially the holistic wellness, there will be, as I just mentioned a moment ago, there is all kinds of programs being spun out of the strategic plan to help with that, regardless of whether or not it is a QEP topic. Okay, you can just go to the question slide. Just so that I can make sure you feel comfortable. If you have any other questions that are not even related to that you might have before I finish up, I could probably take another question or two, only if there's time, Mary. Okay.
I'm just trying to find clarification on the NIH grant. I actually was online looking at the UK website. The segment of diabetes and obesity, is that type 2 diabetes? Is it both types that we recognize today? Type 1 and type 2, I'm sorry.
It is both. And at least in that, and you could look at the data in all kinds of different ways.
Thank you.
That particular, just looking at the data and saying, where is the research in Kentucky? Where is it in different categories? In that particular bar graph, it included obesity research and diabetes research, type 1, type 2, so any diabetes research, at least in that particular set of data.
Yes, I voted for entrepreneurship, et cetera, because I think when it gets out in public, people will relate to that more. But I liked transdisciplinary. So, just for what it means, I think it will gather a lot more oomph behind entrepreneurship.
Gotcha.
A different topic, if I could. I know there is some organization that I forgot the name of that's in the academic world very highly thought of. I think in the Southeastern Conference, we got 2 universities that are part of it, Vandy and A&M. and like Ohio State's part of it and North Carolina.
AAU.
Okay, but
Yeah.
we're not. Is there any effort or any value to UK trying to pursue being in that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And in fact, we've had a number of meetings on that this past month or two, in terms of what do we need to do, looking at the metrics, look at how they actually include. And to be honest, I think UK already has what it needs, but it's going to take a little bit more. It also includes tallying and making sure we're clear on the types of national, international awards that our faculty get, you know, or have had on a regular basis. There are a number of different metrics that they pay attention to. That's a very good question that you ask, and I do think that it's important. And I can tell you, we've had a number of leadership meetings about that recently to try to plan out over the next few years how we would either make sure we're communicating properly, you know, enough in terms of, you know, the incredible things that we're doing, and make sure that we move in a direction that we continue to grow. A lot of the stuff I talked about and the focus on growing research, innovation, and entrepreneurship will help our faculty get more award opportunities. Lisa Cassis, our Vice President for Research, has also purchased a software where it can look at the full profile of a faculty and identify what types of national, international awards that they're eligible for, that they might not have even thought about, but they're that incredible, so that we can help heighten their individual status. And you start doing that on a micro level and you get to a macro level. So that's the nature of, I'm trying to be brief, but that's the nature of the discussion. But a very smart, very good question. And, you know, there'll be more follow-up on that coming up. You have to be invited, yes. Yes.
Just one quick thought. Access and equity. While I think that is a topic in and of itself, it also is something that should be considered across all of the other areas. And so therefore, it's really a theme that should transcend all the other topics.
Access and equity. Thank you. Thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense as well. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to talk with you. Sorry, I went a little bit over. Hopefully your lunch was okay. But I just can't thank you enough for all you do, supporting LEADS, supporting other efforts. And if you have thoughts on anything that I've just been talking about, since the strategic plan is going to be a big part of what we do, the reaccreditation process is going to be a big part of what we do, you know, especially over this next year or two. Please, you know, let us know, and you can always reach out to me directly or through Mary or through Jill. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. You're extremely generous with your time, and your remarks were very valuable to us. As you know, probably everybody in the room knows, some people are football geeks. I'm actually a strategy geek, so this is so cool to me. And I just want to reiterate that, you know, we are very eager partners in the strategic plan. We're also very capable partners in the strategic plan. So we are very much looking forward for opportunities, very specific opportunities, to be involved with the implementation as we go forward. Because I think when you think about the relationships we can bring, the insights we can bring, the networks and the knowledge we can bring outside the walls of the university, which all work together to create a more valuable degree for our students, then that's all of our interests are served. So thank you so much for coming today. And now why don't we take about a 5-minute break, pause. I was told to call it not a break, a pause, like a cat's pause, a very short one. So 5 minutes, get a new drink. You know, maybe if you want to get rid of your stuff on your table, and then come back though very quickly, because I think we have a very interesting afternoon. We're going to do more of my favorite thing, which is talk about strategic planning. Okay. So let's get started again. So now that we've all been educated about transdisciplinary approaches, which actually I think are really, really important. And it's one of the things that as an alumni association, I think we've been really good about, because we have partnerships that span so many aspects of the university, whether it's athletics or different colleges or our constituent groups. But if you want to think of a simple way of explaining the transformation that's going on campus in terms of thinking, I think it's back, something as big as and complex as the University of Kentucky. It's basically like you've got all of these amazing people here, all these amazing, colleges and researchers, and they're all eating in the same lunchroom, but they're sitting at different tables. And so the process I think that's going on now is like, how do you get them to all, sit with each other and have conversations at these different tables? Think about then, I think the problems change, the approaches change. Hopefully then this intentionality in terms of the educational product changes as well, because as we all know in our lives, that's how we are relevant in this very new, very complex and very dynamic world. So I think it's super exciting. You guys are probably completely sick of me talking about strategic plans, but again, I think it's hugely important because it's the bridge from this is how we've always done things to this is what we want to do, which is different from the past, and how we're going to get there. So we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about the strategic planning process again, and where we are. Can we get the next slide, please? Okay, and then you can go on to the next one. And just a reminder, this is kind of the inputs that we've received so far. The president went out on a big listening tour, and we've been doing a bit of that. But so our listening tour, though, given all the alumni we had, is that we had the alumni attitude study, which we conducted back from the spring. And we had a great session in November with Rob Schoss sharing the results of that, down from the 180 slides he had originally to some, lesser number of slides. I think that is recorded and available online, right, Jill? So if you haven't seen that, I would, urge you to take a look at it if you're interested. Our staff has wrestled with that too, and you're going to hear more about that this afternoon. Like, so what does it actually mean? It's one thing to collect data, but it's another thing to actually say, well, this is what we learned from the data. And then the third piece of it is like, and so we're going to do something different based on this. And so we're a part of that, but that's certainly an input into the strategic planning process. We had our dreaming session at the summer workshop where we had some amazing ideas that came out. We had a staff workshop thinking again about dreaming big over this, I guess that was in September, maybe August. We had some breakout sessions at the summer board meeting. And now I think we have something that's extremely important, which is the university strategic plan, because we are here to support the university, and knowing what their plan is means that we can make our plan together to help them achieve their objectives. So just as a reminder, next slide, Mark, these 5 principles that the provost talked about, which are, putting students first, taking care of our people, inspiring ingenuity, ensuing greater trust, transparency, and accountability, bringing together many people, one community. The president set those out really early, and Janie and I had a chance to meet with President Capilouto back in late July, right? And he shared these as his principles at that time. And it was actually quite early in the planning process. These were his core principles there, with the overarching, the North Star goal, as he describes it, of the University of advancing Kentucky. And so it was in the process kind of thinking about what those goals meant and how to create objectives around them, and then to look from objectives to some tactics, some measurements, that we were given the opportunity to, or maybe we invited ourselves to give some feedback on it, because when we read the first draft of the plan, it was very inward looking. And we said, well, there's a broader opportunity here. So, and it was a provost that was very, very welcoming to the comments that we were able to provide back. But those having these 5 principles are really important to us, thinking about what we can do to support that. So the next slide, please. So basically now it's kind of hard work, right? We've got these inputs. So how do we come up with a plan? You know, what's important? And there were 3 big questions in my mind. One was around engagement. What is it? How do we do it? You know, what's important? Second question is around impact. How do we measure it? How do we define it? You know, what areas do we touch? And the third question in my mind was around resources. Like, what do we have? And this is more than just financial resources, but we have resources in terms of people and partnerships and relationships. We have the building, such as it may be. We have, you know, databases, but, you know, kind of what we have and then what we might need in the future to do what it is we want to do. And, you know, and how should we actually look at the process of defining that? So with these 3 questions, what we did was we created 3 task groups that I'll describe them that way. And we gave each group a specific question. And then we kept the groups kind of small. They just really got kicked off. They were created in December, but they really just started working earlier this month after we got past the holidays. Each of the groups, there are 2 co-leads on a group. There's a staff person there to really provide support. And then there are 5 or 6 people in addition on the group. And those folks are drawn from a representation of the board, from the LAC, past presidents, trustees or former trustees, and again, our staff. So we can have these different views, some newer views, some older views, some, you know, high level. So what we're going to do over the next period of time, hour and 15 minutes probably, maybe with a break in between, is to get some initial reports back from these task groups. And I will invite the first group come up, which is engagement, which is co-led by Antoine Huffman and Aaron Logan. Aaron is on via Zoom today, and they are ably assisted by Meredith, right? So Antoine, are you going to kick us off? Super.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you, everyone. It's been great. I think we have, well, Meredith's here, and I think we have Erin that's on Zoom, and she's actually going to kick us off with our presentation. So I think Erin, if she can unmute, and we'll be listening in to her, and then I'll come back in after her. They're working on getting her piped in, so give us a few seconds.
Can you hear me okay in the room?
There we go. All right.
All right. Great. Thank you. So hi, everyone, and thanks for the introduction, Antoine. I'm Erin Logan. Since I'm new to the board, I thought I would just introduce myself briefly. I'm an 06 graduate from Gatton. I'm the former president of the Pacific Northwest Club, and I'm super excited to be a part of the board as an at-large member. My region I define as everywhere, which I know is a little new thinking around what that looks like, but I've been a worker in tech the last 2 years, managing teams in New York, Florida, Seattle, Boston, never met them in person, living all over the country. I've spent some time in Arizona. I'm currently in Ohio, spent some time in Maine. So I thought that background is helpful as we think about how do we have really representation of engagement across all alumni everywhere, thinking bigger about how do we drive engagement far and wide, agnostic of region, location, discipline, and really adopting this transdisciplinary approach. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to talk about a little bit about who the task group members are and some context about where we are on the map and on the journey. We are at the beginning. As Mary mentioned, we are kicking off effectively today. Many on this task group I haven't met in person. Again, it's only been virtually. and we haven't met as a sub team yet. So really where we are is what we hope to accomplish for today's discussion is inform about where we see opportunities, communicate out for the first time some wet paint around this is what our vision looks like. And the goal is to have a conversation leveraging the strengths of our board and LAC to give input on our approach and help us really refine this concept between now and when we get back together sometime in April. So this is early stage thinking, and we're very open to feedback around what this looks like. We have, as Mary had mentioned, we have a task group of everyone of multiple folks. Thanks for moving to the next slide. I'll just go to, all good, move to the next one. It's just fun to do it virtually. So our mission is we want to be a single destination for all UK alumni, demographics, college, region, and figure out how do we implement the strategic plan into a new way of thinking about engagement. We've thought deeply about the strategic plan, and our approach is to take a data-based, intentional approach around what works, what doesn't, and where do we want to go from here. So Antoine, I'll let you maybe talk a little bit about the strategic plan, and then I'll share more in a few minutes about where we are going next.
Thank you, Erin. So as Erin mentioned, I'm going to talk about a little bit the strategic plan, give an overview of that, and talk about what we know from that strategic plan. If you could go to the next slide, please. First, our vision statement. As Kentucky, as an indispensable institution, we want to transform the lives of our students and advance the Commonwealth we serve and beyond through the teaching and learnings, diversity and inclusion, discovery, research, creativity, promotion, and health. And that's deep community engagement as highlighted there in bold. Next slide, please. So from the strategic plan, we've seen the 5 pillars, if you will, that Dr. DiPaola went over, Mary as well. So I won't go into those in detail. These are just the reiterations of those, okay? Next slide. And how we wanted to drive that through these principles, okay, of engagement. So what did we get? Next slide. What did we get from the alumni attitude survey that we all took last year? One was more events. So we've heard from everyone. And if you look at the demographics of age groups from our baby boomers to Gen X, Gen Y, et cetera, in all, we wanted more events. But the caveat was we may not show up because we're busy. I got 3 kids, they playing sports and they in school doing this and doing that. But we want more events and we want to know about them. And also send me pictures, follow up on what happened at the event, even though I won't show up. So those are the type of information that we got back. As we all know, we talked about it today throughout, is more career development, networking opportunities, mentors and mentees, and just helping facilitate career advancement. And Caroline is here and they're doing a great job over there with career services. So doing things to further that effort. And then also overall more communication. The magazine does a great job of that. We have our social media platforms as well. But then again, engagement. We will drive these key takeaways through engagement. Next slide. So I think we'll have Meredith come up. Next one.
It's actually, I'm going to jump back in, Antoine, for a minute, and then Meredith, you can come up too.
Gotcha. So Aaron are going to go with what we did.
So thanks, Antoine. What's encouraging about the survey, if you want to go to the next slide, is we have a ton of great data, which is, and a clear strategic vision. So we know where the university wants to go. We have a new large amount of data. I think there's like 180 slides of information with back-end reports that help us get much more precise around where we see opportunities. That said, we didn't want to stop just there. We want to be able to analyze our own alumni association with your help and peer benchmarks under a new lens. The way that we've defined peer benchmarks in this case is it might be a little bit different than how we've considered peer benchmarks in the past. What we wanted to do was identify who are the best alumni associations that as far as engagement. And we, what we found was there's not a great metric to say who's the best. It's inconsistent depending on what metric you pull. But so the approach we took was we said, who do we see in the workforce, or who do we hear about in networking that often is loud and proud and great at engaging their alumni? And we identified Auburn, Michigan, and Stanford. There's probably more, and we want to go deeper, but we started here based off of what we knew and in the 2 weeks of time we had. And so as we looked at each school, you can go to the next slide. As we looked at each school, what we wanted to understand is, what are they doing? What that we're doing that we should continue or amplify? What are they doing that we're not doing that might inspire new thinking about how do we approach? And then how can we learn from them around what they do well? Some of the schools are stronger academically, some of the schools are stronger athletically, some are both. How do we figure out, how do we take the best of what's out there and bring it to UK for us to consider around where we want to go next? So a couple key takeaways, and then Meredith, I'll tee this up to you as we go deeper into the survey, is we found that what we're doing some things really, really well. Our legacy and student focus is strong. I'm actually a legacy myself. I'm not from Kentucky, but I came to Kentucky because I was a legacy. So that's a strong program, and we want to continue. Alumni award recognition, that's something that we lead in versus our peer benchmarks. And we see strong support for careers across many alumni clubs. We should be really proud of where we're doing things well and think about how do we continue to amplify that as we go ahead. There's also some opportunities to improve. So things like volunteer and service. We heard a lot about diversity earlier today, and we see that as an opportunity as well. Virtual engagement, this is a great step forward around how we're able to engage virtually during a COVID pandemic. We should continue this. It allows us to reach more alumni and in different ways and drive engagement in different ways. And ultimately, what we want to do is become the #1 destination for all things at Kentucky. And so there'll be some work that we need to do to really adopt the transdisciplinary approach of like engaging with the different colleges, engaging with all the great programs and opportunities that exist at Kentucky, and how do we make it easier for alumni to engage. Meredith, if you maybe want to, I'm not sure if you're on the stage or not, but as you're walking up, Meredith has been a really great counterpart. So she's the credit to her for doing all of this deep dive and work around the analysis. She's going to take us through how these link to the strategic vision that Antoine just shared, but then also there's going to be a little bit of homework for everybody, and that's where we could really use your help. So thank you, Meredith, and I'll let you close us out.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we, of course, came up with those few takeaways, but we looked at so many different things in a lot of different categories, looking at how other alumni associations are volunteering, their programs, their activities, their awards, and how do they talk to athletics? How do they talk to students? So many different ways. And yes, we came up with a few takeaways, but we want to hear more. We only looked at 3, but we want to hear from you, our experts, our volunteers, the best volunteers here at UK, and really know more about what you want to see, especially in regards to who you represent here on the board. If you represent a college, think about what your college would want in these questions. So what we have is an engagement survey. So take a picture at least, so you can take it home just in case, or go ahead and scan it. And we want you to do this right now. We want you to take this survey. It should take about 10 minutes. It's going to ask you information about you, because we want to know, okay, who do you represent and what category for the Alumni Association? And then we have lots of questions saying, okay, if you had this activity, would you be interested or not at all? Or I don't really care about that. If you had a club for, I don't know, something in your career industry field, would you like that? Lots of different questions. And we just want to gauge kind of what you're thinking based on what we found of what we're doing here at UK and what other things that we saw from other alumni associations. You may think it's terrible, like we never need to do that. I would never even want to try that, but think about your affinity or your affiliation here at the Alumni Association Board and how you can help. So this is what's really going to drive us to keep thinking about what new engagement things do we need to add to our list? What things do we not need to keep doing? And really start evaluating, okay, what's going to have the most impact? And then what resources do we need to do that? So this is our activity. This is your homework to do right now. We understand if you can't do it right now, we can definitely have a few days for you to take it. But again, we have allotted time for you to take it right now. So we're going to leave this up here and we're going to play some fun dream tunes, I think. And we'll check back in about 10 minutes and we'll be kind of watching and seeing if there's any questions. Yes.
Meredith, one last.
This is intended for those in this room, for our Leadership Advisory Council, for Board of Directors. So they are targeted toward you. That was kind of part of the creating this survey. We kept that in mind as well. Aaron, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, no, as a comment. One last plug for the task group that we haven't met with formally yet. The plan is to take the results of this survey and get our team back together. So I know that we don't have dedicated time for our task group to meet right now, but the plan is we're going to bring these results. We'll spend some time analyzing it, and then we will schedule time with you either later this month or in early February to start distilling this down into our specific action plan. So that's how the survey will be used. And just to reemphasize the importance of, we need your help to help us get the last tranche of data, and then we'll bring our task group together.
All right. So again, quiet survey taking time. Thank you. All right. Hopefully you're almost done or have a couple more questions left. Appreciate you all taking the survey. I've seen a lot of responses come through. Again, I know Aaron mentioned it earlier, but we'll be reviewing these survey results. If you weren't able to take it today, we would just ask that you complete it by Friday of next week. And if you have other ideas that maybe you didn't get in the suggestion box, we would, of course, love to have those. So feel free to reach out to me. I'll make sure you have my email. We're going to be following up with a lot of people and figuring out, okay, what do we take with this feedback? What can we do to really make this proposal as we approach our April meeting? We're hoping to have an outline that we can come and propose to the board as our engagement plan. That's what we have for now. Is there any other questions before we move on to the next one? Okay, I'm going to hand it over next to Rachel Webb for the impact group.
I was so impressed with that survey, all the options. You had so many things I'd never even thought of that I'm excited about now. But it's so good to see everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you to Mary for allowing me to be part of this process. I kind of geek out too, and you definitely are the perfect leader for this season in the association. So I want to thank my co-lead, Jeff Ashley. He's not here today, but he'll be here tomorrow. And also Marcy, our fearless staff leader. We all know that the staff are all-stars, and she is definitely one of those. Also to the rest of our committee members on the next slide, you'll see their names, but we have Michelle and Sheila and Fritz and Keith and Tanya. Now, Jeff and I and Marcy have spoken, and we also did have one meeting with this group that was very productive. So we're also really in those infant stages, and we look forward to getting your feedback at this step. So, okay. So if you have been around the association for any time at all, there's one thing that we hear over and over, and that's that the reason we exist is to serve the university, right? So we've talked a lot today about the strategic plan. I was here actually with the Board of Trustees when we sat down in October. We did breakout groups, we gave feedback, and ultimately we did pass the strategic plan. You can go to the next slide for that. I am not going to read through all these because by now I think we could all put on our mask and say it in our sleep. But these really are what great guiding principles that align so well with a lot of the things that we already do. These were at the top of our mind. So when we started, we basically read through these documents as well as some of the alumni engagement survey and some of the other things we worked on in the fall. So before I share my initial thoughts and our group's initial thoughts, I would love to do just some popcorn feedback. You can raise your hand, notes online. If you want to make a comment, that's great too. Doesn't have to be long. Just tell me when you think of the impact that the association have, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I know y'all aren't shy. I know we did just eat lunch. All right. I'll give an extra brownie cookie thing to the first person. Maybe what is one of the main ways that the association impacts your life? Yes. Philanthropy. Okay, thanks, Hank. So philanthropy is one of the primary areas we have impact. Tanya. Social engagement and entertainment. Okay, I saw Alan back there. I think he raised his hand.
I was just going to say networking, but Tanya beat me to the punch.
So that shows it's a good common theme. Thank you. Anybody else? Way back in the back here.
You all probably don't know me, but legacy is really big for me. My dad graduated from here and now I'm working for the Alumni Association. So it's awesome for me to be able to network with you all through the legacy. So.
And we love our legacies. So definitely that's a way that we impact for sure. Kevin? Oh, sorry about that. Yes.
No, that's okay. And mine's similar, recruitment, student recruitment.
Student recruitment.
And to add to that, scholarships.
Scholarships, for sure. Any more just quick ideas?
Rachel, we have a few
Online.
online
Okay.
suggestions. Well, recruitment's already been mentioned, but basketball is one that came up, as well as I think legacy grants, legacy funding is another important impact.
Okay, so basketball and legacy. Isn't it nice to be able to say basketball and football? That's so fun. Okay, well, we'll have more time to talk. We had a lot of the same initial thoughts that you did. In fact, we started out by asking our subcommittee, send us 3 areas of impact that you think we have that really stand out. So when Mary charged us, there were 2 questions she asked us because she likes to get to the point. She said, where do we play and how do we win? Kind of like those basketball Wildcats. She wants us to know what the priorities are. So I'm going to share what we came up with. Before I do, I found this Steve Jobs quote, and I thought it was so applicable. It said, people think focus means saying yes to the thing you focus on, but that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas there are. And isn't that true? Because y'all, we have so many areas that we could get involved and get our staff involved and our volunteers. But we are only going to have a valuable impact if we really focus on the things that are the most important. So these are the areas that we came away with. First of all, student recruitment and retention. There is a reason that the strategic plan has putting students first, number 1. I think that's something that we can all stand behind. And really formalizing something we already do well, our student recruiting process, and also our retention process. Think about that. It's not just whether we get them here, it's about whether we keep them here and the experience they have. Sheila was on our committee. She talked a little bit on that front. She said they do these send-off events, and of course they're further away from campus. But what I love to hear about is she said now she has students they sent off to be freshmen at UK who are reaching back out and saying, hey, I'm ready to come home. Can you all help me figure out where I might be able to find a job in my field? And I think that's such a good example. And then Michelle Allen, she recently helped us secure a top engineering recruit, a student. And she put it in her words, she rolled out the blue carpet, which isn't that just kind of the perfect description of what we do? But she brought the student to campus. She took time to find out what they were interested in and to make connections even beyond the classroom. Okay, next, mentorship. And I love that George Wright talked about this because I think it's so true and such a lack. And you heard him say it, it's something that most universities are not doing as well. Quite simply because we don't have the people, right? Mentorship is messy and it takes time and it takes commitment. And everyone is kind of running around on fumes a lot of times right now. But really establishing a dedicated mentorship program with set expectations. And this is a great way too that we can zoom in on our diverse students and alumni. So you could do it based off your career field, where you live, or maybe even just a special interest that you have. We would love to be part of formalizing a mentorship program. So our students from a mental health perspective, academic support, just as a whole person, that they were very well supported. All right, internships and career services. This is another one that really stood out to our group. And Tanya talked about how this is something we already do in A+ jobs. So I know we have some folks here from career services, and we totally agree. We would love to take something that's a strength and really invest into that. So taking it a step further, really focusing on internships and job listings and having a well-known source that people can come and post jobs to support and help one another. We feel like that would be very beneficial as well. There's really no reason that UK should not be known as the school where all of our alumni get jobs, and it's because of our alumni support. We feel like with all of our colleges and majors, we have the people to do that. We can just continue to strengthen making that happen. All right, philanthropy and community impact. And I actually wrote scholarships, scholarships, scholarships. That is such a focus. And what we've done as a university to really reach that unmet need of students who may not have the resilience otherwise to finish their degree, and just what sending that scholarship money means to families and our students. Also, in addition to that, community impact. You know, you can get to know someone, you run into them in the hallway, or you even see them in a ball game. But if you want to get to know someone, serve with them. That is really the time that you can get to know each other the most. And that's one of the most meaningful things we can do. So we really feel like we could do more there. Keith, one of our committee members, mentioned stronger relationships with cooperative extension, because we already have that presence in each of the counties. It just is one example. Okay, networking. I mean, we all love to network. We're the people who are here in person, right? Who are like, get me out of here. I need people. That is such a huge part of what we do. And it's one of the things that's kept me so loyal and engaged for sure. Of course, we have social media, you know, all the usual suspects, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and LinkedIn is huge. If you are not on LinkedIn and engaging, you would be blown away. For example, our Gatton College, what they are doing to network their alumni through LinkedIn is one example. But also the value of in-person events. It's great to be in person together and to see faces and eventually mouths and other things. But there's such a value there. And this was mentioned in the last group as well. But not just whether you attend, but that you see the pictures afterwards and you have that feeling of knowing that the legacy is continuing. You kind of feel like you want to be there next time, maybe, hopefully, Antoine, when we miss those because of our other commitments. And then finally, celebration and recognition. I love when I get to open the magazine and read someone's personal story. I am so inspired by what our alumni are accomplishing personally and professionally. Of course, we've got our service awards and we have our Great Teachers Awards. We have the Lyman T. Johnson Awards and on and on. And I think that's such a huge component that we celebrate one another, and we do a great job of that, but we want to keep that going. All right, so these are just some examples of the main areas that came up when we think about where we play. How the heck do we win, right? Because we don't like to lose around here. We want to win. So we came up with a couple of ways that we feel like we could measure. The first one, make qualitative contributions toward the university's strategic plan. We have been doing so many of these things, but a lot of times people just don't know, and we haven't tracked it enough in a quantitative way to be able to point to our work. We need to do a better job of that, and we feel like we can. Also, alumni choosing to become active members of the association. Fritz was hitting on this. He said, it's great we have all these members, but we need them to pull up closer to the table and be active members. And that's something that we can certainly measure. Also, degrees from the University of Kentucky. This was something that Jeff talked about, being in business. All of us are helped if our degree goes up in value. Obviously, our emotive value and connection, but also economic value. We want, when we walk in a room for a job or a conversation, that we feel like our degree stands strong, and it does, and we can strengthen that even more. And finally, we want to be the primary conduit between future, current, and future members of the Big Blue family. This one's a little more warm and fuzzy, right? So maybe there's not a number to put with this one, but this is certainly a major outcome that will feel like a win for us. All right, so finally, our next steps. We are in the very beginning stages, really, in a lot of ways, and we know we've missed some things. You can go to the next slide, and the first one is, what are our impact gaps? What are the things we're missing here? We know we've got holes or things in our periphery that we just have missed. And so we really would love to hear from you. If you're sitting there going, come on, Rachel, duh, you forgot this. We know there are things we forgot, and that's where we need y'all to help us. Also, to assess our capabilities. We talked about this a minute before. We can't be all things to all people, right? We have incredible staff and resources, and financially we've made great choices and are in a good spot, but we have limitations. We are finite. So we need to figure out what is feasible and where do we need to really invest. And then establish the processes that will allow us to put quantitative and qualitative measures on our work. And finally, dialoguing with relevant campus and community partners. I was so encouraged, Meredith and Aaron and Antoine, to hear your all's report, because we didn't talk beforehand, and how much does what we have looked at duplicate your work as well. So these are all really important next steps for us. If anybody has any questions or even just wants to throw out, hey, think about this, this wasn't up there, then I'm open to that as well. I would love that. Okay. Thank you, Mary. And I feel like I have the dream team. So thanks to our committee.
All right. Hey, everybody. I am going to be doing the third task group, which is the resource group. I'm probably going to run through our slides a little bit quicker because positively, everybody before me talked about basically everything we talked about. But it's a really good thing. As we talked throughout our meetings, we talked about how much we wanted to make sure we were in sync with the impact group and the engagement group. So I think it's awesome that we're in sync with that, and it's going to hopefully make all of our jobs a little bit easier. So just like everybody else, we'll have a who we are. So I'll go ahead and start here. So apologize, Marianne and John were unable to come, so you're stuck with me, but I'll try to do justice for them here. So our group, so John and Marianne, a few folks here. We have Janie and John Ryan. Chad, I think Paula is on virtually with us, Blake, and then myself is the staff group. So a pretty broad range from different industries, different areas, I think throughout the country. It was really nice to get to know everybody in my first task group, but also to just see what everybody else's opinions were. So our group resources, we actually started off with doing a survey. So everybody on this group plus our some of our staff members, we asked a few questions. And we're going to go through these slides and some of the questions that have occurred. But we purposely decided not to define resources by actually telling anybody what we thought resources were, outside of the fact that it's really anything and any factor to accomplish the goals or carry on an activity that the Alumni Association is wanting to do. So if we'll go to the next slide here, we'll just go through some of these. So I believe we had 5 questions, starting off with the very basics of an environmental scan to say, what do we already have? For folks that don't know, I'm about 4 months in, so this was a really good exercise for me to see what volunteers thought we had and what our staff thought we had. I'm happy to say that the volunteers and staff are pretty in line of what resources we already have. And so hopefully, again, that makes us a little bit easier when we actually go down this path of resources. So we broke it down to say personnel, which includes our staffs, our boards, directors, LAC, volunteers, campus relationships that we have, infrastructure, which is our technology, our building, I mean, anything that really helps us build upon these activities that we're trying to do ourselves. Our reputation, you'll see later on too, and we've talked a little bit about the attitude study, that our reputation was a big one about our brand, but just what people are thinking about us and how much the word of mouth actually will affect our resources that we gather and get as well. And then financial, I'm sure this is not a big surprise that this is one of the resources that are up there, but this is financial from our donors, from philanthropy, anything else, sponsorships, advertisers, any kind of capital gain essentially into this. And the next question was, what are the top trends that we are occurring in the marketplace or industries around Alumni Association? Again, these are going to be a lot similar what engagement and impact did. But when we started down this, we just kind of wanted to get an idea of where our group and some of felt like where we were going, some of the trends that we felt like were happening. And big things were virtual engagement, university advancement. How do we continue? So the recruiting of students, legacy program, again, a lot of the things that have already been talked about today. but what are those advancements and how do we impact those? Virtual engagement, how do we engage more than Lexington and Kentucky itself? How do we reach a broader audience? How do we make things like this happen where half people are maybe in person and half are virtually? How do we continue to expand that we don't just have in-person events? We continue to engage at all levels and all different areas and throughout the year and not maybe just milestone periods of times. And the next slide here. What are the 3 trends that are occurring in the marketplace or industry that could affect us negatively? We felt like this was a really important question to ask everybody because as we think about resources, you know, we're talking about the longer term, but there are some things and factors that will affect the resources that we're looking for or even change the resources we currently have. So we talked about the competition, the revenue competition, financial side. Specifically, we talked a lot about NIL and how that might affect in the different areas now that sponsorship dollars could go to. The changes in membership model, how the investments are going, all those pieces of how we're all kind of fighting for the same money per se. So how does that going to affect us? And maybe where do we need to make additional revenue up from our normal places? So how do we change where that's coming from? Alumni affinity, I would say we spent a lot of time around this specifically about how it's changing around maybe what affinities look like, how people engage, specifically the last couple of years during COVID, how we're engaging with folks and how they may or may not connect with us in the same manner as they did before. So we talked a lot about, a lot of folks now have more niche affinities. So we talked about band, we talked about dance blue, you know, just your sorority, your fraternity. So how do we connect with them at that level, but at a larger university, continue to build the people that are trying to engage with us? As you can imagine, technology is changing every day. So what technology do we need to continue to move forward, specifically around virtual engagement? How do we continue to build upon that? What does it look like besides Zoom? What technology do we need to engage those folks that maybe physically can't be here in the period of time here? And then coming out of the pandemic, the restrictions and fears that people have, what is that going to look like? We, at this point, don't know. We don't know when it's going to end and how is that going to affect us? You know, I know we talk a lot about, oh, it's almost over. It's almost over. And then something else happens. So how does that actually going to affect us? How can we make those changes? You know, how are our events for the rest of this year going to look like? So just really watching these 4 areas to make sure that we are pivoting in the right way as we continue to build and making sure that we bring in the right staff, we bring in the right volunteers, the engagement side of things, the programming as we look at these couple things. So the next slides, just like I believe the engagement group did, and I'm sure Impact Web, what are the other universities doing really well? And how do we learn from those other alumni associations? So again, virtual engagement is coming up just based off of what others are doing and how they're engaging. What can we learn from them? Campus access, just, you know, I think talking about a new building, talking about how people would get on campus. I think there was a couple of times in these meetings we talked about some of even our volunteers don't know what's happening on campus in the new building. So how do we make sure that is the forefront of what's going on to continue to build that brand for us, but also the university itself? Personal touch points. We talked a little bit about this as well. I think Morgan gave a good example of the legacy program, but how you get connected. So how do we build upon that? How do we make that better to continue to engage and make sure that people are getting the special blue carpet I think Rachel was talking about? And then understanding the engagement metrics. How do we measure our success? How do we measure what our resources need? And if we're doing it well, and if we are missing something? And then just the revenue, how do we change the revenue model to continue to build into it? Is that with sponsorships and advertisement? What else do we need to continue to build so we're not so reliant just on 1 or 2 things? What else do we need to look at? Next slide. Okay, and then we talked about technology again, and I won't go too much in this, but we really felt like technology is changing and something that we really need to continue to look at as we move forward. We just called out a couple of things of virtual engagement. You know, we're going to have to make sure we have the right technology to virtually engage with folks. What does global interaction look like? You know, I wasn't here yet, so I think 2019, 2020, the China Club started, but how do we continue to engage with them? How do we make other global interactions in that space itself? Slide. All right, and then I talked a little bit about this already, but how are alumni changing and how do we continue to monitor that? So the involvement is changing. They want to be more into the social issues. They're limited to the bigger picture. They want to get a little more into the niche programs of it all. So how does that interaction change? How does that affect us? And as we've talked about all these things, I really, our committee also talked about, and Rachel mentioned this, what do we let go of? So what is it? So as we try to get these niche groups interacting with us, are there other things that we need to look at that maybe need to be lessened, or how do we change that, or how do we get the best bang for our buck, essentially? What is that ROI for us? So the next slide, I believe, is one more, Mark, please, is what we're going to do next. So we talked about all these things ahead of time, what we felt like the direction we were going. Again, I felt really good sitting in this meeting, hearing the impact in the engagement, talk about a lot of things we talked about. And for our group, what we wanted to talk about really was want to get with both of these groups and start creating processes to understand what they're looking for. How do we actually go down a process that says, this is what we need? How do we evaluate the resources that we have? What resources do we need before we commit ourselves? But also what do we need to look at in the general program and the general communication plan to say, we don't need to do this anymore if we want to take this on. So what is, so our next step, I think, is to meet with you, both groups, once they're ready, to really start creating that process to evaluate what do we need to get us to the current strategy plan, or the one that we're building right now. And then post that, what do we need to do to make sure we're staying with it? How do we evaluate the metrics that we're creating? How do we make sure we're continuing down the right path? We're continuing to hit these goals. So that's our next step. I think and Janie, John, please jump in here, but I think we feel like right now we are in the right path of creating and being in synergy with these other groups, but we will now create processes that actually help us evaluate what we need, where we need to go, and then also help understand how do we do checkpoints throughout the years to make sure we continue with that. Those are my slides, but I'm happy to answer any questions or anything like that. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jill. Thank you all.
Thank you, Christina, and to your group for your hard work there, and to all the task groups. We appreciate your extra efforts to make those happen in a short amount of time, and look forward to continuing the conversation. I am kind of wrapping up today's end of day session here. So we'll talk a little bit about the future and also reflect back a little bit. So next slide, Mark. The alumni attitude study, a lot has been said about that today, and it's something that we plan to keep on our radar for the next months and years to come. I think many of you were here back at summer workshop when I mentioned that we last did this in 2010. And so we had right at 10 and a half, 11 years difference in those two studies. And so it's been really neat for us to compare our results from 2010 to 2021. And I think on a positive front, we really improved in most of the categories. So I think that's positive to see. A lot of that is thanks to your hard work out in the field and out in your local areas, and also our staff too. But resources are a big key to that. And Mike Ritchie was instrumental in giving us more resources, and that's really been helpful in us being able to do our work. So we thank him too for investing in the Alumni Association. Next slide. Some of the key findings, and I think Janie says this more than anyone. It really has resonated with her, but people want to see events happen even if they can't attend. Something I've learned in my career is that people grow. And so somebody might be really busy for the first 10 years after graduation, and all of a sudden they move to a new place and they don't have a network, and they need the Alumni Association, and they turn out to be a wonderful volunteer, maybe even a donor, maybe even more than that, maybe even a trustee or something like that. And so I think we have to keep that in mind when we have these programs and events, that people are in very different places in life. And just because they don't come to something doesn't mean they don't love UK. Maybe they're recruiting a student, maybe they're a teacher, and they're recruiting 2 or 3 students every year that we don't ever know about. But I think it's important for us to remember that yes, we serve engaged alumni, but we also serve the mass body of alumni too that are doing small things that we never find out about. Post-event engagement surveys are important. We started doing Net Promoter Score surveys a few years ago. We haven't had a lot of events lately like we were, and a lot of those have been hybrid and mixed, but that's something we'll keep doing. It tells us right off the bat if there's something we need to address or if there's something that we can improve upon. It also tells you what you did well. A lot of other alumni associations do these things too, and we also learn from them. Somebody will tell us, don't do this, it didn't work, or, we didn't think this was going to work, but it did work. And we learn from each other a lot too. Career connection and mentoring, providing career support. Our staff knows this is important. I think during COVID, I always tell Caroline and Amanda, they were our shining stars in a lot of ways. My mind goes back to April of 2020. We had an unemployment insurance webinar. I think it was April 5th. It was really early in the pandemic. And there had been kind of the first wave of people losing their jobs all over the country. And we actually maxed out our Zoom registrants. We had to figure out a way to expand our Zoom license to accommodate the number of people that were going to attend that. Then we had to throw it to Facebook Live because we had even more people that wanted to attend that. So if you can imagine being in the office 2 weeks before that in a very traditional work environment, and then all of a sudden we're all on our phones, we're testing, somebody's on Facebook Live, somebody's on Zoom, we're all texting each other to make sure we can hear. Now we all know how to do Zoom like the back of our hand, but at that point in time we didn't. And we're thankful that Caroline and Amanda knew how to do it because I think they carried the whole university through the early days of Zoom. Amanda was the voice of Zoom, we say, for UK because she was doing so many events as an MC, but we know that's really important and ongoing. And Caroline, would you mind to stand up? I just want everybody to know who you are if they're new. Caroline started with us in 2002 and really has built our entire program. So this is the 20th year for Alumni Career Services. And I don't know that you'll find many other alumni associations that can say that. So thank you to her for sticking with us for this long, but also to all of you for your support. So thank you. Also, communications. We often think as staff, we're sending too many emails. We hear that sometimes, but what the survey told us was actually the opposite, that we were actually sending just enough or maybe not even enough to some people. I think it was actually 3% that said we were sending too much, but a lot of times you let the low percent of people kind of dictate what you do. And Rob Shaw cautioned us on that, the facilitator with Alumni Attitude Study. I also have to remind myself that we get everything, and that if you live more remotely, or you're only a graduate of one college, not two like me, or not as connected, you're not getting every single email that we send out. So we do send out a lot of emails. We probably in the next decade will need to figure out a way to be more savvy with preferences and who wants to get more email and who doesn't, and that kind of thing. So we'll work toward that, but it did tell us we didn't over communicate. Repetition is key. I majored in marketing, and I think you've all heard this, but I think you have to see something 7 times to remember it. And a lot of times they recommend you see it in different waves. So if you think about that, we've got to remind people 7 times about everything. So it's important for us to diversify our communications and make sure that we repeat without being too annoying. So we're keeping that in mind too. That gets into the next point there, multiple avenues of communication. Different people like communication differently. Some people like mail. My grandmother, who's 90, enjoys getting her mail every day. I would say that is the highlight of her day as to what comes in her mailbox, and she reads every single bit of it from cover to cover. I might go through my mail twice a week. Ryan is better at getting the mail than I am. I do read my emails pretty religiously. I think most of you all know that. He does not read emails very well. So if you need him, you better text him. He will go through the mail though, a lot better than I will. So that's a good example of how people are just different. More awareness on Alumni Association brand. I'll commend Meredith and her team. This weekend's conference is branded. This is something that we're trying that's a little bit different. We also, you may notice, fall more in line with the university branding. So right now that's Wildly Possible branding. So there's a color palette, there are certain fonts, there are certain sizes. all of that kind of thing that we try to incorporate in what we do, so that when you see something from the UK Alumni Association, you automatically think UK. I was in Emmy's Sunday school class not too long ago, and they showed logos from different brands to, these are 4 and 5-year-olds, and they recognize McDonald's right off the bat. They recognize Starbucks. I would venture to say none of them drink Starbucks, but they recognize Starbucks. They recognize Nike. And the point of the exercise was just how influenced, children are even at a young age. And that's true with our alumni. So we want them to know that it is definitely a UK piece when they get it. And again, our current communication level is not too much. The associate directors, we spent one of our senior staff meetings hashing through all the slides. Mary talks about the 180 slides. It was a lot of slides, but a lot of information. And these were kind of the key things that we found. So next slide. General feedback, student recruitment is important. I don't think that is news to any of us. Some of you may have heard Mike say a few times before he retired, he talks about how hard it is to generate for clubs sometimes a scholarship check of $5,000. Some can do that more easily than others. But if you recruit one student to UK, and think if that student's an out-of-state student, you're bringing in $20,000 a year to the university. So 20,000 compared to 5,000, the net gain on that is a little higher through student recruitment, but we don't really look at it that way very often. But I know that many of you in this room could go tell me one student that's here right now that you helped recruit here. And I know our alumni do that. So we want to tell that story a little more deliberately. Creating traditions and connections. One of the things I think we've done in the last few months that's been really great is, and this is a COVID win, I would say, but we weren't able to have our traditional commencement reception. So many of you that have been president of the Alumni Association have come with us during commencement weekend and come to our reception. We engage a lot of international students in that reception. A lot of legacy families that are familiar with the Alumni Association will come by. But starting in 2020, when we resumed in-person commencement, they didn't want any of that to happen. Rather than encouraging students to stay, they wanted them to leave, just so that we didn't have crowds of people gathered as much. And so one opportunity we had was we got to, and we asked, but the university granted us this permission. We get to give every graduate a UK alumni lapel pin as they exit the stage. And attached to the lapel pin is a card that explains the UK Alumni Association and how you can get involved and be engaged. And that has been so well received. We have students who drop theirs or something that email us and say, I'm so sorry, I've lost mine. Can I get another one? But you think about the shelf life on a lapel pin and how long that's going to last for many of those students. And then you think about a reception where they might drink one glass of lemonade and walk out the door. And so back to what Christina was talking about with resources, those are decisions we're going to have to make. Do we still do a reception and the lapel pin? Do we let one of those go? I don't think we're letting the lapel pin go if we can help it, but that's an idea that, and an opportunity we didn't have until COVID. So I think that's a tradition example. It's a small one, but I think it's one that we have room to build on. And that's our role for sure. Bowman is another great position or tradition, excuse me. Bowman turns 10 in April, in case you don't know that. But that has been wonderful for photos and visitors on campus to be able to have a spot to go to for photos and that kind of thing. So next steps, we don't need to put the alumni attitude study on the shelf, just continue to go back to it, remind ourselves, learn from it, build on it. Create working sessions to execute some new things. I think if we ever do get to a more normal year, we'll have a better idea. I think we often get a little bit hung up on, well, what's this year going to bring, or what's the next few months going to bring? Even today, this weekend's a good example of that. We weren't sure, even in the last several days, what was going to happen. We want to engage our colleges too. So I've got a few to still follow up on with specific information to the college, but they were very interested to learn. One of the things that Rob said repeatedly was that Gatton alumni love athletics. He said, it's every school I do, the business school loves athletics. It was just kind of, I would have never thought about that, but
they may need to work with them. They may need to work together on some alumni. So that was something that he mentioned. Next. When you came in, I hope you got an annual report. They're really pretty. Thank you, Whitney. And Meredith's team, they look really great. This is something that we have done before, and some years it's been more elaborate than others. There's always a financial report in the magazine every year, and we do that to kind of fulfill our 501c3 mission and make sure our constituents know what we're spending and how we're using their money. But this is a more elaborate annual report, and Mary really encouraged us to do this. So I'm glad we were able to make this happen. But it gives some of the highlights, and this is from 2020, 2021. So I know it's a little bit late in the years from last academic year. But when the books close on 2021, it does take a while to get everything compiled. And so we'll try to do that at this meeting every year. If things get a little quicker on the accounting side at UK, we might be able to speed it up a little bit. But this took a lot of people in our staff deciding what goes in, collecting the information. We meet every June the 4th. So you all may or may not know that's the day the Alumni Association was founded, June the 4th of 1889. We have a lunch that day and we talk about our wins for the previous year. And so a lot of people come to that meeting with thoughts and ideas. And so a lot of these wins that we talk about from the last academic year came out of that meeting. So next slide. This is our performance, membership growth there, also our fund, and all this should be in your annual report. But the markets have been very good to us the last several years. And Jesse is really great. Jesse's not here this morning, but he'll be here, or this afternoon, but he'll be here tomorrow, about keeping us in line on our financials. We also have Mark Nickel coming tomorrow from Bayard, formerly Hilliard Lyons, to present our financials. But everything has been really healthy. You may notice a slight decline in membership, and that is because we were carrying old annual members in the old model, and then we switched to the new model. So that was the first round of deactivations, plus you throw COVID in there, and I think we lost some people to that. So I'm not too alarmed about that, but we'll continue to watch that. I do think the new membership model has been a good thing. I think we don't get as many calls about confusion as much, and I think people appreciate being included and under the tent, and having more freedom to decide where they give at the university. These are some of the things that transitioned to virtual engagement that may or may not continue, but some things that we have, some ways we've successfully engaged alumni. The Great Teachers on Great Challenges series, the Great Teacher Award turned 60 during COVID. So it's really one of the, I think, best ways we connect with our colleges throughout the year, but it's the longest continuous award for great teaching at UK. And we were able to actually pull in past great teacher winners and have them talk about a COVID-related topic virtually. And we were able to engage alumni all over the country. We had people in like Costa Rica and Japan, all kinds of places joining us for those talks. So it was really a neat thing to witness and to see. So that's something we'd like to continue. We are proceeding with a normal great teacher program this year though. So we have been doing the recognitions of late. Perspective letter writing campaign. So this is similar along the student recruitment lines. We also kind of helped with retention. I think early on in COVID, there was a fear a little bit at the university about losing students. And so our alumni were gracious to write notes of encouragement. Also, there was a very critical time early on when students decide if they're for sure coming to UK. And our numbers went up. Our yield numbers went up after that. So I think you're seeing more alumni associations across the country focus on yield. And I think you'll see more of a focus on yield efforts with student recruitment in the future. We also expanded job clubs. So again, I told this story a few years ago, but Caroline had this wonderful idea several years ago to have a job club in Lexington. Our city didn't have one, but if you've ever tried at least 5 or 6 years ago to park on campus in the middle of the day, it's just not really possible. So our building wasn't much of an option. It's kind of a workday program. So we partnered with Extension, and the Fayette County Extension Office has been our host site for Job Club
since it started. When we moved to COVID, all of a sudden there were even more career needs, but we also were able to engage a virtual audience. And now we've had alumni from over 30 states participate in Job Club. So if you think about one county or one region of the country and of our state to 30 plus states, that's a program that I don't think will go back to just in person because it engages too many people remotely, and we're serving more people than we were before. So again, another forced COVID win, but it's been a record number of attendees during the COVID era, and appreciate all the efforts to pivot that program. We've also had a podcast start, and so we've featured some of our Hall of Distinguished Alumni inductees on that podcast, and that's been really neat. Hannah and I also had the opportunity to do one for the university that was repurposed for alumni, so we'll continue to keep that on our forefront. Diversity, Christina talked about our new alumni club in China, and also our One Day for UK fund in 2020. And this was Tanya Phillips's year as president, was going to be to try to endow our Lyman T. Johnson Scholarship. But we had to postpone One Day for UK because we just didn't think it looked good asking alumni to give so soon after COVID started. And so we had that particular One Day for UK in September, and then turned around and got right back on schedule last April. So we actually had 2 One Day for UK drives in the same academic year, but I'm pleased to say we were able to endow that scholarship. Tanya played a big part of that, as did Marcy. And many of you may or may not know that prior to that, we were funding that scholarship, but it was out of operating dollars. It wasn't endowed. And so that coincided with the 70 years of integration and was a big win for the Alumni Association and our students too. Governance, as you all know, we launched a new governance model in the most unideal time ever, July 1st of 2020. And this is our first in-person LAC meeting in the winter. We did have one at summer workshop. We had to do our very first one virtually, which I would not have drawn up that way, but I appreciate everybody's patience and support through this governance transition. It was a huge change for our organization. Next. One thing our staff's really proud of is we were recognized at the district level with 4 CASE awards. So CASE is our Council for Advancement and Support of Education. It's our main professional organization, and it's highly regarded in our field of work as kind of being the benchmark for alumni relations, philanthropy, advancement services, and PR and marketing. Our awards that we received, we got 1 platinum award, which was for the 70 years of integration overall. You may or may not know that we actually told the administration about that anniversary date. So we all know it's 1949. We're very familiar with Lyman T. Johnson, and I don't think it wouldn't have been discovered, but I think we were able to get out in front of it and say it a little faster than it may have been told. But whenever that date was revealed and we started thinking about it, the university really put a lot of resources into making that a special year. So we had Trevor Noah here. George Wright was one of the visiting faculty members. There were lots of programs. You all may remember we had done the Pioneer book a few years prior to that. So that kind of fit in with what we were doing. And we were recognized with the Platinum Award for that particular program. And that was really a university effort, but the Alumni Association played a huge role in that. We also had several new accreditations received by the ACS team. So Caroline's now a certified retirement coach. So, and she and Amanda have been, they're highly regarded in their field. Amanda was selected for a leadership program too that she's participating in, and then national recognitions for the career services team. Next. And that's kind of it. The other CASE awards, if I can remember off the top of my head, the Stronger Than Ever video that again, Tanya was our one of our MCs for. They made me go on top of the diving board at the swimming pool and film my portion. That was a little bit nerve-wracking, but we did it. But it was a really good video, just trying to get people excited about the Alumni Association as we turn the calendar year. Great Teachers on Great Challenges was another one of those programs that won a CASE award. And then also our 1970 and 2020 letter and our class connections between those 2 classes. So I see Brendan here. There were several of our volunteers on the Golden Wildcat reunion committee for the class of 1970. And we worked with them to actually write a letter and record it to the class of 2020. The class of 1970 also missed commencement. Theirs was a little more unexpected than the class of 2020 was, but it was a neat connection and it really grew legs. So the Herald Leader picked up that story. We also wound up making it the cover story on the fall issue of the magazine that year. So there was a black and white side and a color side. And it really talked about connecting those two classes. There was a grandfather and granddaughter. One was in 1970 and one was in 2020 that didn't know each other. The granddaughter had no idea her grandfather never actually went to commencement. And so they were able to share their story. It was just a really neat opportunity. And again, something the Alumni Association kind of told the administration about. So our hands are in a lot of things. To use a basketball term that I've said before, we have a lot of blocks, steals, and assists. We may not always score the points, but we hopefully set up other parts of the university to score some points through our work. And just appreciate all that you all do. Mary, I don't know if you have anything to say as we wrap up. Oh, okay.
But especially since members of our sorry. So I was saying if Jill, if you could take some questions, if there were any. I know that this is the first time, I think for some of the LAC members to engage in person. Since we have some new ones on. Tomorrow's more the business portion of the board meeting, but questions about yourself and your team and the types of activities.
Sure.
If anybody has anything.
Fire away.
Would like to just start. We should give you guys a round of applause for all those awards.
Thank you. Thank you. Shane.
I wanted to actually thank you for that report, Jill. If you guys are doing this, then great. If not, then here's some two ideas that you were bringing up. Does the admissions office still have counselors that are geographically territories and different things like that?
I will say yes. I think staffing has been a little bit of a hurdle, I will say, for multiple departments at the university, but them in particular. So I'm not sure they're all filled at the current time, but yes, they do.
Because when you were talking about the recruitment, the financials and all that, it was really good information to repeat what, like you said, you had to hear it 7 times. So I was like, oh, that's the first time I heard it, but maybe I didn't. But what that said is having those admissions counselors be connected with the various board members and LAC members in their respective regions. So that way, if I have a student in mind, I've got a connection with the admissions office and say, hey, talk to Joe Schmo, who's at, or Jane Schmo, make sure we're gender, Jane or Joe Schmo at the admissions office. And that way there's an immediate connection. So if you guys are already doing that, great. If not, that was one idea. And then the last one is the lapel pin thing. Again, I didn't know you were doing that. I'm glad you're doing that. Again, maybe you said it 5 times and then I got it on the 6th time. But on the lapel pin, if they're already doing this, great. If not, having the QR code on the lapel pin, but not of the website, but on like Instagram, our Instagram page or something that these kids are so hipster in, whatever. Do we have a TikTok page?
We do.
Do the Q. I'm not on TikTok, so that's why I asked. So have, give them the QR code for our TikTok page.
Yeah.
Because they totally get into that probably more than anything else. So that's it. Thanks.
All very good suggestions. I'm happy to report that the LAC tomorrow, which will be meeting at the Career Center, is going to receive a toolkit. And that toolkit is actually focused on student recruitment resources and things that they need to know to be successful. We also, as staff, had a pretty in-depth meeting with the enrollment management team just before Christmas and had some good idea sharing, have had some continued dialogue. I know Jack has exchanged some emails over there. And you may remember you weren't here last January, but we had Tony Colella from the admissions office as one of our guest speakers, and he talked through some things, but always good suggestions. I think keeping it top of mind is somewhat of a challenge sometimes when you have turnover, and just making sure that we do that. And I started in admissions, many of you know that, but I even offered to them, I said, if you just need somebody to help you carry your stuff, into a college fair or something like that, tell us. David Mosley's sister was with me in Owensboro for 3 hours one morning, and I still remember her. I remember all that we talked about, but she was right here by my table for 3 hours one morning in Owensboro working college fair, and she was representing the Davis County Club at that particular time. So I told them to consider bringing that type of assistance back if it could be helpful. Others?